Thank you very much. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole agenda for Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024 in the beautiful town of East Gwillimbury. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the April 23rd meeting of Committee of the Whole, which I now will call to order. I'm going to ask if there's any declarations of interest from members of council. Seeing none, I will move along to our land acknowledgement statement. The town of East Gwillimbury recognizes and acknowledges the lands originally used and occupied by the First Peoples of the Williams Treaty First Nation and other Indigenous peoples, and on behalf of council, I thank them for sharing this land. We also acknowledge the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as East Gwillimbury's closest First Nation community and recognize the unique relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and the waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and we join them in these responsibilities. Item D on our agenda today is community announcements, and I will begin with the following. We started this week by raising the flag to recognize and celebrate Earth Day. This came after a very exciting weekend of hosting our very first Eco Fair in East Gwillimbury. A thank you to our staff and our volunteers, the Environmental Advisory Committee, the Indigenous community partners, and other valued external partners, and all those who took time to come out and make this event a success. On Sunday, we cheered on our emergency services team at their charity hockey game. We thank them for their support of the Youth Community Initiatives Fund and the local food banks. Just as a reminder of the upcoming South Lake Run, it's happening this Sunday. Yes, this Sunday. Put it in your books, everyone. For our hospital, good luck to the organizers and participants. Are there any announcements from members of council? Councillor Crone, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, I'd like to thank all the folks that came out to Coffee with Council. Councillor Lahey and myself had an open house for our residents, and we had a member from York Region Police there to do a community safety with us. So I want to thank everyone that came out to that. As well, last Saturday we had the pancake breakfast at the North Union Hall, and I want to thank all the volunteers that made that happen. We had a full house, and everyone left full, which was good. And again, building on what you said earlier, Madam Mayor, thank everyone who participated in the Eco Fair and the community cleanup. We had a lot of families out on Sunday cleaning up the town, and I think we had an impact. And I think it goes without saying we should commend our staff member, Christina Ross, who led the initiative and did a great job. Fortunately, she's not here to hear this. I suspect she's recuperating from all the hard work she put in. So it was well done, and thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments? Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. As you mentioned earlier, this Sunday morning is the Nature's Emporium South Lake Walk and Run for York Region, and I would like to say that as team captain, there's still time to sign up to join the team. It's a special year because they're celebrating their 100th anniversary at South Lake, so feel free to still sign up and register online, and we're hoping to beat Aurora this year, so we're going to do our best. Thank you.
Do our very best. Any other comments, concerns, questions? Thank you very much. I will move to deputations. It's item E1, D. Simoni making a deputation to committee regarding a residential sewer connection. Are you here with us today? Welcome. Come on down to the front.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm here today to re-request a sewer allocation for my property. To give you a little recap, before the Sharon subdivision, the Sharon Village was being built, I came to one of the town meetings and I spoke to a few members of the town, and I asked them if there would be possible to hook onto the sewer connection for my property, and I was told yes, once the work commences, we'll be able to connect to the sewers. I believe back then it was town's chief engineer, Don Allen. A few years later, when the sewers were installed, I was told to come here and do a formal request for connection again. And after a few town meetings, I was told that we cannot connect to the sewers because there wasn't enough allocations. So that was 2017. It's been 8 years since, and my family has grown. I'm sitting on an outdated septic system, and the sewer connection is beside my lot. So I'm here to ask council, if possible, to allow me to connect to the sewers. That's why I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you. We certainly have heard you several times speaking about this situation that you have with your home and your family. Are there any questions from members of council? Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just as a comment, thank you very much for coming forward today. I know that you have been advocating strongly since, as you said, since 2017, and I think that the fact that you're here again today to clarify your position speaks to very much the challenges that we have been facing here in making sure that we have transparency in how allocation is given out. And I think that the fact that we're arriving at where we're landing on an allocation policy, and previously as it was presented to us, there was talk of committee adjustments, having a small portion of 100, and we talked about having individual residents, and we talked about just 10. And the fact is that I think that we need to make sure that we're championing residents first on the allocation that we do have. Whenever it is available, whenever we get clarity on what that allocation is. And I think that the fact is that you have been leading the charge, and I know that there is only a handful of residents, I would say there's two specifically, that have been looking for this for the past or 6 years, or close to 6 years anyway, prior to 2017. So fully support your position, and looking forward to the opportunity for us to be able to get you the servicing that you're requiring.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Roy-DiClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to our deputant. I was here in 2017, and I believe I put forward the motion. The decision was not that you couldn't connect, but that we wanted you to be able to connect when the second phase of servicing came in. And unfortunately, we don't have that second phase of servicing yet, but as luck would have it, we've got some of the folks here from York Region who are going to give us an update on how things are going with that process. So it wasn't a no, it was we can't just yet. And I think that's still the case. And as Councillor John said, our draft allocation policy does allow for individual connections. And I think that I'm hopeful that in due course we'll be able to confirm. And I believe, through you, Madam Mayor, that staff have also been in touch with you about the cost to connect.
Yeah, there's been some estimates on the cost.
Okay.
Some estimates. And just wanted to add something. This is not a luxury for us. It's just necessity. So we're hoping that it can be resolved.
Thank you for coming today.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this time? I'm not seeing any.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Councillor Roy-DiClemente, would you move? Thank you. All in favor? And that's carried. We are at item F in our agenda today, and our first presentation is Mr. Rabeau and Ms. Accardi, on behalf of York Region, making a presentation to committee regarding the York Region Sewage Works project in Holland Landing Lagoon update, which we're really excited to hear about.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to members of council, thank you very much for having us here today. I'll start by noting that I'm joined today by our Chairman and CEO, Wayne Emerson, and Pina Accardi is going to join me today. She's our Director of Water, Wastewater Capital. She'll be providing a bit of the presentation today. That was my old role and what brought me here so many times over the years. Just as we get into the presentation, maybe I will reminisce because it's been about 2 years since I've been here to speak to council, and I think I was coming at one point 2 to 3 times a year to talk about the Upper York Sewage Solution Project. And I think at the time it was the Upper York project that I was discussing, and the last time I was here, that project was still in play and still the preferred solution to service growth in Aurora, Newmarket, and East Gwillimbury. Since then, I think you're all familiar with Bill 23, and what's happened there, it's revoked the Upper York project, and it directed the regions of York and Durham to pursue a sewage solution project in the York-Durham sewage system by expanding it and providing the services that will send sewage down to our Duffin Creek plant for treatment. Obviously required expansions at that facility over time as we send sewage there. So since November 2022, staff have been working as a project team to deliver the required reporting. We've been doing that with Durham Region. So all through 2023, consultation, Indigenous communities consultation, dealing with all our regulatory bodies. The report was completed late in 2023, and we put it on public notice for 30 days and a subsequent 60 days to accommodate other communities and First Nations. So that closed off, and we were able to submit our final report as of March 15th. Completely out of coincidence, absolute coincidence, last night we received approval for the York-Durham sewage system expansion. So 15 years we have been talking about an unapproved solution to service growth in this community, and for the first time as of today, we have an approved solution. So it does have other challenges we need to face in terms of other approvals and funding mechanisms, et cetera, but we do have an infrastructure solution. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Pina. I hope I didn't steal too much of your presentation, but she's going to give a little bit more detail on some of the infrastructure solution, and then I'll close off talking about the lagoons a little bit.
He actually did steal most of the presentation. Please, next slides, please. Continue. Next again. Perfect. So as Mike mentioned, the Supporting Growth and Housing in York and Durham Regions Act legislated a new provincial direction on servicing growth in the region's northern municipalities. So this new direction required York and Durham regions to pivot from the previous plans for constructing that water reclamation center in East Gwillimbury to a Lake Ontario-based solution. And so what you're seeing on this slide is the new solution that directs wastewater south through the York-Durham sewage system, what we call the YDSS, to be treated at the co-owned Duffin Creek plant in Durham Region. So over the last year or so, as Mike mentioned, we have been working very closely with the ministry, with the towns, agencies, Indigenous communities, all to detail that infrastructure that forms this very large York Region Sewage Works project. So from the map on this slide, or the maps on this slide, the project consists of 3 groupings of infrastructure components. So what you see is the North YDSS expansion, which is a series of pumping stations and conveyance that's located mostly in the town of East Gwillimbury, Newmarket, and Aurora, as well as some in the city of Richmond Hill. There's also the South YDSS expansion, which consists of twinning of the Markham collector. And the third part is the YDSS primary system expansion. And that consists of work in Durham Region, mostly Pickering and Ajax, to twin the primary trunk sewer and to expand the Duffin Creek plant, as well as build a new outfall. So based on a very high-level conceptual design, the preliminary cost estimate for the entire project, and I know this is a bit of sticker shock, is upwards of $5 billion. The North YDSS portion, again, a very high-level estimate, is about $1.8 billion, and that needs to be refined as we proceed through the detailed design stages. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide provides a more in-depth look at the North YDSS expansion. It's comprised of about 22 integrated infrastructure components, which will all need to be built at an accelerated rate to enable that capacity to meet housing targets. So the current plan is to deliver this project in 3 phases over the next 15 years or so. The Phase 1 projects, which you see in blue, are the most immediate needs, and those are included in the region's 10-year capital plan at an estimated cost of over $500 million. Again, a very preliminary estimate that will need to be refined during design. Completion of the projects within this first phase will provide some capacity flow for housing as early as 2027. Focusing in on East Gwillimbury, the Phase 1 projects located in the town include a few here. So the second concession sewage pumping station upgrade, as well as the second concession north and south gravity sewers. So with these, the construction probably won't start up until about 2025, early 2026. As in with other capital projects, the town will be engaged, as well as throughout design and construction will be ongoing communications with council and impacted residents as well. In Phase 2, there are 3 projects in East Gwillimbury, and those are further out in the 2026 to 2031 timeframe. And those are the new Queensville East sewage pumping station and force main, as well as the Holland Landing decommissioning, or Lagoons decommissioning, which I know everyone is very interested in hearing about, and Mike will speak to a little bit later. And lastly, in Phase 3, which is from 2029 to 2041, the projects include upgrades again to 2 sewage pumping stations, namely the Queensville West sewage pumping station and the Holland Landing sewage pumping station, as well as there's going to be some force main work in that later Phase 3. Next slide, please. All right, so in terms of next steps, at the end of last year, we obtained regional council approval to award the engineering design work on the North YDSX expansion Phase 1 projects. So with the minister's approval that we received just yesterday, we can now proceed with finalizing negotiations on those agreements, and the team will complete the field studies and designs for the Phase 1 project components. So ongoing engagement will be needed to secure the required permits and approvals. As well, we also have commitments to continue engagement with Indigenous communities, as well as local municipalities and any other interested stakeholders. So although the Phase 2 and 3 projects are in the region's 10-year capital plan, we have not yet secured the funding to advance this infrastructure, and we are continuing to pursue funding opportunities among the development community, the provincial and federal governments as well. We do have a standing monthly meeting with the landowners group that EG staff participate in actively, and that will be used to continue to discuss advancement of the project. And now over to Mike on the lagoons.
Thank you, Pina. Just before I go into the lagoons, and Pina did mention the sticker shock value of $5 billion, and sometimes I like to speak to that a little bit because it is very much an estimate and very much, having not gone out in the field to do the proper work or the required work to evaluate what costing will be. I'd also note that the first slide she showed with all the 3 components throughout the entire system, a lot of those projects were already contemplated in the plan, and really what's happening is they were planned costs. They're just coming forward a bit. So as a result of sewage coming down to Duffin Creek rather than being treated up in East Gwillimbury, obviously you're going to have to advance some of those projects to convey it down there. So a lot of those costs already exist in our planning and master planning. And again, this isn't a cost all at once. This will be required over the next 20 years to build out the entire system. It does contemplate other growth region-wide in terms of those southern projects. So just want to qualify that a little bit as it pertains to the cost. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the lagoons, and I think over the years of being here and talking about them, we're all aware that the lagoons were tied to the new plant that was going to be constructed, the Water Reclamation Center. There was a requirement by the province to keep that facility active in operation, and the license would be transferred to the WRC when it was going to be commissioned. As of 2022, we still didn't know when the WRC was going to be commissioned, so there was no commitment to when those lagoons would be taken out of commission. And, it was a big question mark. And as of 2022, I think we were still talking about a date of 2031, 2032 at the earliest before the plant could be built and the lagoons decommissioned. So next slide, please. The first piece of good news is we are going to be decommissioning the lagoons by 2028. In combination with Phase 1 of the YDS expansion being completed. So with the completion of that infrastructure, we will be able to decommission the lagoon. So our intent over the next 3 years or 4 years is to keep them in operation, and I'm going to speak to that a little bit because we have some strategies in place. And then come 2028, once we know that the expansion is nearing completion, we'll be able to take those lagoons completely offline. Next slide, please. So as with the lagoons, and when you think about the entire system of what we're doing, we're building a conveyance system. We're not building a treatment solution up here anymore. We're going to be moving our solution down to Duffin Creek. That's where we're going to treat the sewage. Now, the lagoons have been used as a treatment facility over the years and were contemplated to actually treat sewage. So our first strategy going forward is that we're no longer going to use them as a conventional treatment facility. We're not going to send sewage there on a regular basis. In fact, we're going to use them as little as possible. So when they will be needed in the coming 4 years is in the event that we have high extreme flows in the system. So big storms, big melts, and the system is overburdened with water and sewage, but primarily stormwater, and we can't hold it in the system, and we don't want to release it to environment, so the lagoons will be used. So this provides a few opportunities. One, that if and when they are used, and it could occur that they don't end up getting used, or maybe it's once a year or twice a year. In the event they get used, it's going to be a lot of stormwater going to the lagoons and not sewage. So that's one benefit of not using them during regular flow. Now, we still have to operate them like a regular treatment facility, so we have to do all our testing, and there could be a time where we have to manage and release effluent out based on parameters within there, because there still could be a little bit of sewage that has to be broken down in the lagoons. So in the future, we could have to release. Now, we're going to try and manage as to when and how and make sure it meets all provincial criteria. The other commitment we have is if we have any concern or think there's going to be any odor generated from the facility, we're going to let the community know. We're going to have a communication plan with council staff and the public to let know there could be odor generated from the lagoons. I mean, the reality is that with or without the sewage, I mean, there's organics in that area. Even in the future, when the lagoons are gone, it's going to be a prairie area. It's going to have water. Water is going to be contained there. There will be organic breakdown at times, and I think anyone that lives near a conservation area or a swampy area, odors are still generated based on organics breaking down over time. So I think the good news is it's going to be used very little for sewage treatment, if at all, in the coming 3 or 4 years, and then it'll be completely decommissioned by 2028. And that is our intent for the Holland Landing Lagoons. Next slide, please. I think that pretty much ends the presentation. Yeah, so thank you very much. I always thank our regional council and our chairman for their efforts over the years of this project. And this council as well has been steadfast in their commitment. Spent a lot of time here with staff and council and very much appreciate your support in getting this going. We've switched ways a couple times, but here we are at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful message today. Thank you. Questions? Councillor Foster, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Mr. Rabeau, this is great news. You may not believe this, but I think over the years, I think Councillor Carruthers will agree with me, we have left some meetings thinking we hit you kind of hard with some of the questions and the way we push. But this is really, really good news. The biggest thing I see with this is the communication piece, and everything you said about that works for us too. So, I think in the past, the communication piece would have helped at the time. But anyways, we're going to put up with some short-term pain for some long-term gain here, and this should work out. Thank you.
Councillor Carruthers, go ahead, please.
Thank you. This is so welcome. It's something that we've been pushing for so long, and I appreciate it. The residents who've been putting up with it for decades appreciate it as well. I just want to make a very quick ask on the habitat restoration. One of your slides looks beautiful, but it's got all that invasive Phragmites. That's what the picture's of? And we were walking down there this weekend, and that is really taking over all the cattails down there. So knowing that the plan is to restore it to its natural habitat, I would just ask that maybe someone from the region get down there and just take a look if there's anything that they want to do in advance, because if we wait until 2028, all the native cattails will be gone. So it's just a quick request to hopefully someone can take a look at that restoration sooner rather than later. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Councillor Roy-DiClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I actually had a couple, but I guess I'll start by saying that this is probably the best news we've had in a long time, and that is, number one, that the lagoons are not going to be actively used for sewage, and you have ministerial approval for a servicing solution. I mean, that's the headline right there. You know, because when I started to read your slides, I thought, oh, we've gone to the province for approval, and we've been there before as well. So, so I'm delighted to hear about that. I guess what I wanted to have a better understanding of, part of the reason why we couldn't take the lagoons offline was that the allocation had been given elsewhere. Have we been able to, perhaps now that our first phase of growth has been in place and those flows are coming, you know, the modeling that you did versus the real time and real life flows, is there more capacity in the pipe now? Are you finding that there's been efficiencies in the flows and so on? Is that why you're able to take this step now?
Thank you. Through the mayor, I'll try and address this in parts. So I think going back, the intent was to take the lagoons on when we built the first phase of the YDSS up second concession. And I think the intent was they were going to come off shortly thereafter once that was constructed. And then, of course, that changed when the Upper York sewage solution came into play and the license issue came into play as well. Now, I think at the time that they were going to be decommissioned when it was still the Upper Leslie and not the Upper York, at that time, it was anticipated that, you know, the YDSS would be completed, but within 2 or 3 years, the Upper York was supposed to be completed. So you would have had homes start to build out, you know, in those original days and years, and then, you know, over the next couple of years, the full solution would have been in play. So at the time, it was contemplated the lagoons would come off and phase into when growth really started to pick up, but we'd have that new solution in play. Now, obviously, today, we still don't have that solution, and we started to build a lot of those homes, and we're well beyond, I think, 50% of that build-out. So that play out kind of is why why we can't take them off exactly today and why we have to wait for the additional infrastructure. But again, it really ties to why we can't take them off is really the hydraulics in these peak events is that, you know, it's partially just based on the way the system's designed, but it's also related to climate change and the amount of flows we're experiencing in the pipe and the type of events that we're seeing. We're no longer seeing, you know, 25-year events, which are supposed to be events that come once every 25 years. That's what these systems are designed for. The reality is we're experiencing 1 in 100 year events, and these kind of flows are filling up our system. So we don't have the hydraulic capacity, and why we might need to use these offline or online when that comes, because it might overburden the system before we can build the 2 first phases of the 2 trunks that are going to kind of create that equalization that the lagoons would be contemplated for in the next 3 to 4 years. So that's effectively it. I mean, in terms of the sewage flow, we do have capacity to put in the system. So you're comparing 2 different things. You're kind of average day peak or average day base flow, which is the sewage kind of production, and then there's your peak events and dealing with all the extraneous that comes in. And that's what your systems are really designed for, is those peak events. So that's kind of how the difference of the 2 scenarios.
So it's creating some redundancy in the system.
For now, exactly,
Thank
until we have
Okay.
other redundancy.
Thank you. If I may, Madam Mayor, through you, I wanted to touch on, we'll call it the sticker shock issue. The infrastructure funding that you're going to be needing to build these systems is dramatic. I know that the town has partnered with you and with our neighbors to the south to put an application in for a grant with the province. I think it's a drop in the bucket. I mean, 140 million versus 5 billion, or there's a bit of a gap there. But I'm just wondering if you've heard anything from the province as far as the success of that application.
Thank you through the mayor. So not yet. The submission was due on last Friday, so we have made the submission in an effort with your staff and, of course, Aurora and Newmarket staff. Great collaboration, great team. I didn't expect the amount of collaboration when I came to the table with the idea, so it was fantastic. Not that your staff aren't completely collaborative, but yeah, it was very great to advance that. Yeah, I mean, at the highest level, we can get, I think, around 140 million at 35 per community to advance the phase 1. But again, you know, we are talking in the billions, and that only contemplates phase 1. Phase 2 and phase 3 aren't currently in our DC bylaw. They're not in our background study, not in our master plans. So that all has to be recalibrated so that we can generate a revenue model. And not only that, a revenue model, you know, or funding that aligns with the timing that we need to deliver it in to sustain the forecasted growth that's coming. So we don't have an answer on the first application, and we certainly are going to be advocating for further funding, whether it's federally, provincially, or other financing opportunities to look at the way things are. And I should have said this when I talked about the sticker shock effect, because there's actually a very simplistic way of looking at the sticker shock. I mean, in one case, we have a sewage system that we manage, and we have projected costs for that sewage system in terms of the growth that's coming. And that's what was there before this big change. Now, if you take a plant that was going to be up here, and you were going to send sewage up to this plant that was up here, and you're no longer going to do that, and you're going to send it way down here, it's going to cost more. You've got to get it down there. I mean, different kinds of treatment, but at the end of the day, it's kind of a wash in terms of what we're doing. The reality is we've been directed to take a solution here and put it way down there. That is going to cost more. It's going to cost more, A, because we've got to pay more because there's more infrastructure needed, and B, we've got to cram the timelines a little bit because all that stuff that we were going to do down here, that was out here, is now pressured by that coming down, so we have to advance it. So, over the long term, it'll be the same except for the additional by having to move it, but all the costs will play out over time. So when we speak to the $5 billion, it does contemplate other costs that have been planned for the future, and it's just compression and moving things. But the additional cost is really about, no, we got to get it a lot further away now, and that's what creates the addition.
Thank you. I guess for me, I was looking at it going, well, the cost per resident in York Region would be in the thousands, and that's just one component of growth in the infrastructure that's required to support it. So, we all have a commitment to addressing the housing crisis, but if that's how much it's going to cost the existing residents, it's going to be a real challenge for everybody at the table to try and get there. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you very much, Mr. Rabeau.
Councillor Crone, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to our presenter. I'll just echo it. This is great news on the lagoons. I can see the smiles. I think they'll have to have plastic surgery to remove them from their face from our Holland Landing councillors. And I am envious of the free time that they'll have when they don't have to answer all the phone calls about the lagoons. It's good news. Let us know what we can do to speed it up. I wasn't going to let you off easy and just say thank you. If we can hurry it up, 2028 can't come fast enough.
Funding support application helps, so that's...
Okay, good to hear. My question is, my first question is in respect to the first phase that you'll be doing. Once that's implemented, how many units of allocation do you think East Gwillimbury would have at that point? Because we've gone from the fastest growing community in Canada, we're grinding to a halt because of lack of allocation. I think we'd like to get some projects underway. This will be an important answer to hear.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so I'll qualify this statement that obviously we're still in kind of the ground truthing of what we're constructing and what actual capacity it will release, but we do have some preliminary numbers for phase one and what we want to try to achieve going forward. So a few things. Late in 2025, we have committed to an additional capacity assignment to the local municipalities region-wide. So coming in late 2025, we'll likely be assigning capacity to the locals related to the first phase of this build-out, meaning that once the phase one build-out's done, come end of 2027, early 28, that capacity would be made available. I think our understanding is in the range of about 8,000 units would be available from the first phase of capacity. Now, that's 8,000 for Aurora, Newmarket, and East Gwillimbury. So, we have to kind of look at how the municipalities have grown. You've made a point of being one of the fastest growing municipalities, but we also look at performance over the previous years. So, to say it'll be the number divided by 3 might not be an accurate approach. We might have to just qualify what's been happening, what's forecast to happen. Permits or applications in the hopper, and these kind of things kind of inform how we assign. But I think for the 3 municipalities, we'll have in the range of 8,000 units available for the original phase. And so with that, I mean, in the previous Upper York regime, we have funding in our DC bylaw and background study to advance that. So that's something we're progressing on now. And now with the approval, we can go uninhibited to get to that point. With the phase 2 and phase 3, that's where we have to start looking at funding opportunities and financing opportunities. So ideally, as that 8,000 gets eaten up, and we can look at different rates of how it gets eaten up, but is it 5 years, is it 4 years, is it 7 years? At some point, more capacity is going to be needed, and that kind of calibrates where phase 2 is needed. Now, to say phase 2, phase 2 is not currently funded or financed to be able to achieve that date at this point. Let's just say it's 5 years. So what we'll have to figure out is how we're going to do that and what the opportunities are. And we are doing a DC bylaw update sometime in 2026. So a lot of this infrastructure will be in the bylaw, but it won't necessarily be positioned where it's needed in terms of that. So it might be positioned further out, meaning financing arrangements or other arrangements are required to bring it forward to actually create the capacity on time. And that's something we're going to continue to advocate for in terms of funding or look at opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Madam Mayor, if I, one last question. So it's conceivable we could be going through some starts and stops as we go along with the phasing into the allocation. I wanted to jump off of of where Councillor Roy-DiClemente was going on the cost. It's staggering. And I was just curious, what was the price tag that we had assigned to the Upper York? Do you recall that? I don't want to relive history, but I think for context, it's good.
No, great question, through the mayor. So just straight up going back to the Upper York project, now it was proposed in 3 phases. It was the first phase, let's say it was going to be completed by 2031, just for example purposes. So 2031 was going to be the first phase, and then the second phase was needed, I don't know, somewhere within the 5 to 10 year range. And then we kind of guessed where the third would be required based on rate of growth. So sometime beyond 2041 for the third phase. But at the end of the day, it was over $1 billion for the infrastructure. Now, it's hard to compare, the Upper York project versus what's been proposed here in the $5 billion, because it's not apples to oranges at all. Like I alluded to, this is related to other infrastructure required for the entire region and the entire system. Maybe a comparable you could say is the 1.8. That being said, that doesn't contemplate treatment in there. That's more conveyance. Anyway, I'm just complicating it to show you it's not an easy one-for-one. And that's why I go back to that simplistic view. I mean, after 40 to 50 years, whatever is incremental from where we were will be the fact that we had to move it locations. And that'll be the additional cost, that we had to move the sewage from the north down to here. That'll be what costed you more. Also, we're going to have to spend more up front, because with the plant that we were going to build, we could phase it and we could build it on as needed when the growth was happening. With what we have to build now in that North YDSS piece, we have to build it all at once. Or now we've tried to phase it as much as possible to not build it all, with phase 1. So we have the phase 2 and phase 3 to make it affordable, but it's still not quite as good as what we would have had with the plant in terms of phasing opportunity, because you only go down and tunnel a pipe once. You don't do it in phases or go back, and you do it once, and then it accommodates growth for 40, 50 years. So that's why it pushes things forward as well.
No, and I appreciate the context that you've put that in. That I know there's no clear answer, but I think it's inescapable that by making this decision to go down to Lake Ontario, it's increased the costs on all the backs of people in York Region. So that's not lost. Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here and bringing the good news.
Councillor Johns, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. Through you, I just got to say, I'm sitting here listening to everything, and it is a sincere pleasure listening to you speak whenever we get to hear somebody who is so passionate, and you're clearly excellent at your job. Everyone. Yeah, no, it really does come through, so I appreciate that. So I couch that, saying that, and I'm very passionate too, but sometimes my brain gets ahead of my words, and I may not be as good as a communicator as yourself. So what I'm about to say, if you can kind of catch the spirit of where I'm going with this, when you talk about the allocation of the 8,000 units that will eventually come once things get going in the first phase, and obviously getting split between 3 municipalities, my job is obviously to advocate for East Gwillimbury as opposed to Newmarket and Aurora. But I think that you just heard a deputant here who is asking for 1 unit, And a couple weeks ago, we had another deputant asking for 1 unit, and that was from, 2017. And we're going through our processes from an allocation standpoint, or from a allocation allotment standpoint of making sure that we have that structure here ready to go when the taps get turned on or the pipes gets opened up. I think that it is important to you, for you to know the lives that you would affect, like individually, real and on the ground here in East Gwillimbury, like with the way that the communities have built out, as you well know, we have incomplete communities. And the fact is that, 100 units in one spot and 100 units in another, that would dramatically change the quality of life for existing residents here with the ability to complete communities and then having those DCs come in and off of that. And so when we're talking about 100 units, or 10 units, I am hoping that there can be, when you're looking at the 8,000, that there can be a staggered approach. Like, is there an opportunity that there is actually 10% capacity down the line somewhere where we could throw 18 units to East Gwillimbury? I know that doesn't seem like a lot from the work that you're looking from a bird's eye view perspective, but you would dramatically change the quality of life for residents in EG if, instead of the approach of taking, okay, pipes on, ready for business, split up the 8,000, that we were able to take an approach that said, okay, another 50, another 100, another 200, and East Gwillimbury gets that. Now, that may not change the lives and the quality of life in Newmarket and Aurora, but I will reinforce again, that would dramatically change the quality of life for our existing residents here within East Gwillimbury.
Councillor Roy-DiClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to riff off of what Councillor John said, I want to reiterate as well, and I'm sure you're aware of the letter that our staff have written to you about our ICI allocation. This isn't just about quality of life for our residents and unfinished subdivisions, where there's roads that have been built and street lights that are in and no houses because there's no allocation. But we are also being severely limited in our ability to attract investment and to build a complete community. So being able to advance the commercial aspect and the institutional and industrial aspect of our community, I think, is almost as important as finishing the empty subdivisions that are approved but not inhabited. So I'm going to reiterate that. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you for that 1,000 cubic meters a day or something. I don't know what it is, but I'm okay. But I just want to reiterate that it's important to us, and I just want to make that point as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Crothers, please.
In reference to that, I'm wondering if you can give us an indication of the likelihood of us being able to get that extra allocation for ICI and when we might know that, because that's very important to us to be able to attract investment, as Councillor Roy-DiClemente says, and we're going to be discussing it a little later in the agenda. So since you're right here, if you have anything to add, now's the time. Thanks.
Through the mayor, I was aware it was on the agenda, and I figured maybe I'd get a question or two. And I have received the letter, and I do understand the content and the request within. I think we're taking it very seriously. We do understand, and there's been a pressure for some time to look for additional ICI allocation or assignment to be allocated. I think there is an opportunity there. I don't have any numbers. I know that the 1,000 is almost double what was there in the first place, but not to say we're not going to evaluate what is the art of the possible in terms of making as much available to the community for further development. We are aware through your staff team that there are pressures and requests in the door, very real ones. So this is front of mind for your team. So what we have to do, it becomes, again, very scientific and technical. We model it and we figure out what is possible and without putting the system and our communities at risk, what can we adequately provide without without, contemplating that risk and any issues that could come up. So there are a few things that have happened, and certainly certainty is another thing that we have in the coming years. So that provides an opportunity for us to look at those numbers. So that is happening as we speak. And I had been in discussions with staff about, what is the number? Councillor Johnson just approached it, but I don't have that number today. And I can't say it's going to be, that high level, but we're going to do what we can to provide a number.
And when do you think, what's the timing on that? When do you think we might get an answer?
It shouldn't be too long, like in the coming weeks. It's
you.
not like months or anything like that. I think the work is happening, so it should be responded to in fairly short order.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? I just want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. It's been a long go watching those lagoons and the embarrassment of talking about open sewage lagoons as new members moved into our community and called to find out what the heck is in our backyard. So from my bottom of my heart, I feel so good about it. I know that it will open doors for us that we've not been able to open. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would like to get, let me just see, Councillor Roy-DiClemente, could I have you move the first
Received with thanks, please.
Thank you. All those in favor? And that's carried. The second one that Mr. Baldwin brought before us, I'm wondering if Councillor... Oh, go ahead, please. I'm just dealing with paperwork.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, members of council. It's a pleasure to be here. Must admit, tough act to follow after Mike's big news. As someone who has been involved in the Upper York and those files since day one as well, that's big news. So congrats on getting that moved forward. And we're certainly as well here to help on any of the restoration of the wetland, although you did call conservation areas stinky. So I'm not sure that's a great partnership approach, but no, we're glad to help. That is significant news for this area of the watershed, and something exciting, especially for the town here. So I think last time I was here, 18, 20 months, I'm not quite sure the last time I was here, giving some updates on where some of the changes with conservation authorities were going, and I'm here to update on those changes as well as some new ones that have come along, and there is some exciting news as well, maybe not as big as that, but some pretty exciting news as well, I think, for those that certainly have been around and been dealing with some of the challenges around the illegal activities that go on in our regulated areas. So next slide, please. So as you may recall, Bill 229 was the large omnibus bill that came in that had significant changes to conservation authorities. And I will note one of the changes are term limits around our chairs and vice chairs. And January saw our chair change. Chairperson, after years of trying to get exception requests and pushing the ministry as far as we could, finally was required to step down. And our new chair is Councillor Claire Rietma from the city of Barrie, and our vice chair is Mayor Randy Greenlaw from the town of Oro-Medonte. So this is their second term on our board with Mayor Haxon, so we're welcome to have them, and they've been thrown into the role quite quickly. So that's the main change. But around Bill 229, the biggest thing for us was around our financial transition around what they called mandatory programs, like flood forecasting and land management and those type of activities. And all that work took a couple of years to do, and all the heavy lifting is now complete. It needed to be complete for the January 1st budget, for this year's budget. So all that has been done, and that's been dealt with our member municipalities, so that we deal that with the region. And all our other various governance requirements and all those things that were due by the end of 2023 are all in place. And all that's outstanding are 3 deliverables that are due at the end of the year, and that is a watershed resource-based management strategy, and that's more of a broader look at the entire watershed and what are the gaps and what are the areas of stressors that we can continue to work on. A very detailed land inventory, that's something we already had well in hand, and it's just adding to that and cleaning up some of that work, and that work is basically actually almost wrapped up. And a broader conservation areas management strategy on how do we look at the lands we own and how do we manage those as sort of as an overarching document. And that will complete basically the transition under all the Bill 229 requirements. Next slide, please. Bill 23, Mr. Rabeau mentioned that as well. That also has some changes to us. And the biggest one, and this is one that I was here, I think, really to discuss last time, was around the role that conservation authorities have played in development plan review. We no longer are involved in the review of the natural heritage aspects of development planning, other than those areas that fall under the jurisdiction of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, which East Gwillimbury is not as often, because most of the growth in the development is falling within the white belt land. So something that has certainly changed the landscape. And to help do that, we've been hosting and doing training sessions for municipal staff as they try to figure out how to do something that we were doing, and what does that process look like. And we're always there as a resource and a technical expert to help guide, or if they need information mapping, or a, what do you think of this, a thought. We're there to help provide that. We also were moved, similar to municipalities in some way, from the site plans and how that affects us. And most of the time, that is not an issue. But at times, there is the odd time where some of these exempt site plans are in conflict with our regulation, and that creates a bit of work. We work through that process, but on occasion, that does appear. Where we really saw the impact was when we were moved from natural heritage, not only providing that broader holistic service that we always have provided, is the ecological offsetting program we use to help balance the impacts of development so that we can restore the other areas within the town and in the watershed. That program, unfortunately, sort of was killed as a result. It was a sort of a unfortunate part of that process, and that's one that has hurt us as we've seen the ability in our funds to do some of the ecological work diminish. And we're seeing the odd other challenge with some of the development proposals. We're seeing a backlog in some of our communities around natural heritage. There's not enough consulting capacity in Ontario to actually deliver on the work that's required. And last week, 10 conservation authorities met with Minister Smith at Queen's Park to discuss some of the new changes, but also what are some of the areas we raised. And we raised this as one of our bigger issues, is that bringing back that holistic service would be a benefit to ensuring that houses get built faster, and we do it in an ecologically and safe manner. So those are the updates on the past ones, but on to the new ones. So next slide, please. In late February, the government, through the Minister of Natural Resources, brought down some changes both to the Conservation Authorities Act through promulgation, as well as a new regulation, OREG 4124, which is really around our hazard regulation. So they told us around near the end of February, and it came into effect April 1st. So not a lot of time to do some significant adjustment and changes, but we're kind of used to that, so we were able to operate quickly on the fly. And there are some significant changes on this. Traditionally, our hazard or our permitting regulation was known as 17906. They were watershed specific. The watershed specific regulations are now removed. It is now an Ontario-wide hazard regulation, which is the 4124 reg. So that's a big change. So that allows for more consistency across Ontario, and it actually returns us back to the way we were prior to 2006. It also removed a couple of the tests, what we do when we look at permits. One was conservation of land, and the other is pollution. Those tests were removed because conservation of land was always a challenging one to try to evaluate and use. And they've been replaced with unstable soil or bedrock, which we have a bit of both in the watershed. We have some bedrock areas up in Ramera, and some of the unstable soils is also wetlands, as well as lacustrine or shoreline sands. One of the big ones is our setback, or our offset to wetlands that we regulated, was 120 meters. It's now been reduced to 30. So there's been a shrinkage in the area that is regulated by the authority. And that regulation was never a prohibition. It was just an area of influence. We wanted to make sure what was going on in those areas, was it influencing the actual wetland. So it doesn't really dramatically change anything, because it was a very permissive setback anyways. It's just, it shrinks the area of regulation. So that will reduce the amount of permits we will see, because you think across a watershed of 2,700 square kilometers, and you take off 90 meters on every wetland, that's quite a chunk of land that is now no longer regulated. There also is some increased delegations of powers to staff or to the CAO, just to help expedite certain aspects around that. And there also is increased opportunities if the applicants feel they aren't getting good service, or they don't like the decisions or whatever. There are opportunities for review, increased opportunities, as well as appeals to the minister, or they feel the costs are unreasonable. So there's a few additional elements provided to the applicant for more abilities to at least have, if they feel they're being treated unfairly. And one of the other ones that is unique is now, similar to sort of a bylaw, is exemptions for accessory sheds less than 15 square meters. We no longer will be permitting sheds that are smaller than that. That's both good and bad. Good, because those are the small things that are going on that our homeowners are typically involved in. Bad thing is they can go anywhere. And I am not as concerned about ones around wetlands and those things. Well, I am concerned about someone building one on the edge of a creek, upstream of a bridge or a culvert, and we do get one of the big rain events and that shed blocks the culvert or road. Those are the ones we're concerned about, and unfortunately, it is straight exemption. The landowner has the right to do it, and mimicking matching with the building code and the around bylaw, it basically is a bit of a free-for-all with respect to those small sheds. So that's one that we have raised as a concern. And what we've said is we'd really like to at least have some ability around floodplains, because that is our area of most concern. But we'll see where the province will take that. Next slide. But on to the really good news part. Maybe not as big as Mike's, but it is big news. We now officially, as of April 1, have stop work power for the first time. We have been advocating for decades to get this. And I have stood here many times before in my previous role, as well as this, talking about illegal fill and working with your staff to try to use your stop work power when applicable. We now have the same. So that is significant news. And we're just actually taking a board report in May on a process on how we will make sure we use that appropriately so that it's also transparent and clear. But that certainly changes the playing field around our ability to enforce. And that also comes with enhanced power to enter, basically somewhat equivalent to bylaw. So we basically have an ability to enter the property without search warrant if we see an egregious or an offense about to occur that would certainly contravene the regulation. So that gives us more equivalent power with your bylaw officers. And the big one also is the fines have changed. The maximum fine was $10,000, a drop in the bucket if for an illegal operation of some form. The new fines for an individual, the maximum is $50,000 and $10,000 a day for contravention of a stop work or failure to comply. But for corporations, it's a max of $1 million and $200,000 a day. Those are deterrence level fines. That has quickly spread around the community. We made sure to help spread it around the community. But that is one that will certainly get the earful, because we are seeing the maximum fines imposed on in some of our areas along Highway 48. But that will certainly change, and that was exciting news, and I think will be all that together finally brought us, I say, into the modern age. We were sort of languishing in a challenging time, so really appreciate the government coming forward on those. Those are very significant changes for us. One of the other things that's contained are some proposed minister's powers. They're actually up for review on the Environmental Registry of Ontario right now, with a due date of May 5th. And the minister is looking to increase, in essence, the powers that they already had a bit more through definition. They will have the ability to issue or refuse a permit directly as minister. And with the minister, we asked him this directly, and he said this is for projects of significant provincial interest, such as those large Honda plant or the large infrastructure businesses that are occurring at a provincial level scale, or potentially for the large municipal infrastructure projects, such as what like the YDSS option is. Those could be done through minister's power. But they also can order a CA to refuse a permit. I'm not quite sure how that might work. I'd like to see how that plays out. And what the big one, I think, is the minister also has the ability to change or alter or cancel a condition of a permit. If we put something in of some form that it is deemed to be inappropriate or excessive, the minister may alter or remove that one condition, leave the permit in place and remove. And we are very careful about that. Conditions on permits should be germane to the activity and to the hazard. Using the permit as an ad hoc tool for either planning or other purposes is improper, and that, I think, is where the minister is going with that. There are a few concerns about minister's power, and one is they've always had it. They've just made it a bit more formalized and a bit more like matter of fact. Is who does the compliance or enforcement on a minister's permit? Well, the expectation we've heard is potentially us, but we're being asked to enforce a permit we collected no fee, have no levy for, and have no power. Might put us in a bit of legal peril and a bit of, or what if it contravened our guidelines? Or also, some of these permits could also contravene zoning or bylaw. How does that come by when you have a permit, an activity's been permitted but is improper use against a town requirement? So there are some concerns we've raised with the minister and his staff, and we also will be raising through the ER posting coming in by the next week. Next slide. So how are we adopting to all these changes? We approved some transition guidelines at our last meeting in March, just to give some staff some guidance. There was no way to complete all this work for April 1st. Like because it's not only is it just we had to redo all our mapping. And our draft mapping is now available, so you can go on our website and click on the new wetland mapping to see what it looks like. It's up there for 30 days as a public consultation, but it's a shrinkage, so most people will appreciate that. I know that, I've been through that before. Everyone likes it when it goes down, not when it goes up. So that is up for review. Our new enforcement protocols will be going before the board in May, as well as we revised our development guidelines to match the new conditions. And there are also some looks at some opportunities for delegations on minor hearings for minor elements. So not the large scale issues, but the minor things to help speed up the process. For those, I know Mayor Haxon as well as Shermiston have both been through some hearings. They are lengthy, costly, and timely for issues. If there's a way to expedite those, it's the same, would just be helpful to everybody involved. And lastly, just a few updates on the broader Conservation Authority. We're in the midst of, exciting midst of breaking ground this year on our new nature center at Scanlon. I hard believe I would ever say this as the CAO of a Conservation Authority, but I was happy to see some trees come down where the building is going. It's not something you normally would hear from me, but it means that the building is coming. And we will offset for the trees. You guarantee you on that. But it is exciting news, something that's long, and it's also being built without a municipal ask. It's been through donations, federal grant, et cetera. We're doing it without a municipal ask, which I think is significant. Hopefully, we'll be successful in the freshwater action plan submissions that went in, and we'll implement those depending on how we were. I know we had letters of support from many of the local MPs, and I know Minister Van Buynen was very strong in his support of our application. We're also doing a lot of work on information management and network security, just like all of you. I'm scared, petrified of what something could go wrong, so we're investing in that. Many of you are aware that 2 years ago we received a large property in Georgina. May remember it as Maple Lake Estates. We're 900 acres, and we're working on moving forward with that. We'd have some Indigenous consultation, and what does that look like? That is a large property, and it's just a future showcase for this watershed. So that is something we'll be looking at. And as well, this year we'll be developing a new strategic plan as well as a sort of living dashboard, not quite real time, but quasi real time, so people can see where we're not only our board directors, but the public, where are we at with some of our initiatives. So with that, that's just a brief update on some of the activities. And as always in our world, it's been busy.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there's going to be some questions. I'll start with Councillor Lahey. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I enjoyed your presentation. I wish we saw you even more than once a year. I know that you're a very busy man, though. So with regard to the new enforcement powers that the LSRCA has, do you have, respecting the fact that there's still some unknowns in terms of who's ultimately responsible for implementing and compliance, et cetera, could you speak to the impact it will have on the relationship with our municipality and specifically our bylaws department in terms of that relationship with the LSRCA?
Through Madam Mayor, I think it will actually enhance and expand it. I think we've unfortunately had to rely often on the municipality because you have a suite of powers that wasn't afforded to us. I think now we're roughly equivalent in many of the things. We still don't have Part 2 powers on fines and those type of things, but doing inspections and having power to enter equivalent and all that, if illegal activities on both sides of, say, the magic line of our area versus the town, that will bring us a much more peril. So I think this actually helps both sides be much more diligent and efficient in enforcement. Thank
you very much. And one more follow-up question, if I may, Madam Mayor. There's so many exciting things going on very quickly. Just for the sake of the public, for their awareness, are these meetings open to the public, which I believe that they are? How would the public go about participating in or attending the meetings of the LSRCA?
Yeah, the board meetings are always public. They're held in our office. We're working on a fancy digital system like this for later this fall, so we can go fully live all the time. We're not quite there yet, but they're always open to the public. They're always on the fourth Friday of each month at our office in Newmarket.
Councillor Crothers.
Thank you. The timing of your presentation is fantastic because we had received a letter from the Minister of Natural Resources and Forest about the Regulation 4124 that I asked to place on the agenda so we could have some more information on it. So that's coming up tonight. So Madam Mayor, heads up, we don't need to discuss that. We have all our questions answered now. So I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you about if you had any information on the phosphorus reduction plant that's been proposed, if that was anything that you would be able to let us know how that's going, if it's happening, what the latest on that is.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'm fortunate. We're involved heavily in the work being done. So it's been assigned to the Ontario Clean Water Agency, or ACWA, to run it's basically a very expanded feasibility study. It's very into the weeds. It's not a full EA. They're looking more at the design parameters and not so much all the other aspects. So they're nearing their due date is sometime in May. I don't recall the exact date. So they have a deadline that they must meet, and the minister has made it abundantly clear there is no extension. They've been hosting meetings all across the Bradford and King area with the Holland Marsh farmers and the Growers Association, as well as all the constituents in that area. It's being led by someone who certainly has a lot of experience at Aqua, who has a lot of experience in this, is Debbie Krolnick. Many of you may know Debbie from her time at York Region or at Simcoe County. But they've also brought in the services as a part-time assistant. Mike Walters is helping provide some guidance because no one knows more about this project or the history of this project than Mike. So it was the only project he said he'd ever come out of retirement to spend any time on, and he was true to his word. So they have used Mike heavily on that, but it is on track. I haven't had a meeting lately, but they will meet their guideline to submit their report to the minister sometime. I believe it's early May. I can't remember the date.
And any idea when it might be operational? Like what kind of time frame would that be?
Operational, that's the hard part, I'll admit to you, Madam Mayor, is this will send it to the minister, then the minister will make the decision on what do they do? Do they send it to an EA? Do they do it through minister's order, or their direction of the cabinet to fast track it? I would assume that would be high on Minister Kanjan's agenda to do so because of the nature of the project, as significant as it could be to Lake Simcoe. So I could see it being on a very fast track to resolution if the results are satisfactory to the province.
Thank you so much.
Councillor Roy-DiClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Mr. Baldwin. Thank you for being here today. I wanted to just ask, OREG 17906 was the one that dealt with your conservation authority, and then the 4124 is sort of the province-wide. Were there a lot of changes between those? Was one more permissive than the other?
Through to the mayor. No, not really. The reg, it's more of a really just a swap in the simplest terms. I think the biggest changes are around some of these specific things around the minister's power, those elements that are tied in. There's really, and the exemption. The exemption would be the one, say, I would call it permissive area. Everything else basically remained the same, and the wetland reduction. How the test, how we evaluate projects, those type of things, none of that has really changed.
Okay.
The process is the same.
Great. I also wanted to get a better understanding of the changes in setbacks from 120 to 30 meters with respect to wetlands. Does that also refer to, and maybe it's just a labeling issue, floodplain and hazard zones, I guess is what I'm looking at? Like, if it's 30 meters setback from wetland, does that also reflect that as far as floodplain and hazard areas?
No, it doesn't. It's specific just to wetlands. Floodplains are delineated on their own independently and have a very strict set of criteria on how they're applied.
Okay.
The wetlands is a little more generic, so it's just 30 meters just on those. And when we do the overall regulation limit, it is the greater of which one. Like, the wetland could be further out than the wetland, or the wetland boundary could be slightly out further than the floodplain. We go to the extent of the greatest.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's an important distinction. And one final question, Madam Mayor. All of these changes, have any of them impacted your source water protection work?
To mention, no, nothing at all.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, go ahead, please.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I was just thinking about how to phrase this my next question. You brought up the tree cutting at Scanlon Creek, all for the future and good purposes. We actually just went through a situation within our future heritage district of where a property owner came in and clear cut a bunch of trees down, and it appears that they, I'll step back from that and say that we're working through our tree bylaw, so these things happen on a pendulum swing. So it was, as we're working to put that in, you are the body that helps to protect us and protect our trees. And I've got an email that talks about the investigation that occurred through LSRCA, yourself, in the regulations, and it was told that permission is not required through you folks if you maintain the stumps in an area of the water course to ensure no impact to erosion occurring. So to clarify, if you don't need permission to ensure that there's no erosion, who determines that the stump existing there would be okay for the erosion? It would not be your body, it could just be myself saying, yeah, I think that's okay. Like, how does that message from one body to an individual, like, how is that governed?
Yeah, that's you, Mary. This is a challenging one. We get this one a lot. Unfortunately, our regulation does not address tree cutting. Our concerns around when to remove the stumps, and that basically then modifying the bank or the bed or the floodplain, that is constituted as development, and that's the activity that we are active in. But the actual tree removal is covered off either by regional or local tree bylaw. We unfortunately, and it's one we get all the time, but is one that is not covered by our regulation.
And in follow-up, Madam Mayor, I just wanted to thank you. So it's not covered by you, but Kristen Nyberg, your environmental compliance officer, is following up. So she would be responsible after the tree came down to look at a stump.
Yes, usually if it's within a regulated area, then we are actually usually do the compliance checks jointly with town staff. So usually we go in to make sure that they're adhering to any of our regulations.
Okay, so, and not to be a jerk about this, just because I'm trying to get clarity. So if you don't have governance over it, which is very clear, what is the environmental compliance officer going by to look at if they don't have jurisdiction? Like, what are they going to say? I'm really not trying to be a jerk.
No.
I'm trying to take a step back. So then they come by and they say, yeah, that stump looks good or doesn't look good? How can you support us in our journey to protect our environment in these type of situations?
Through the mayor, we get hundreds of calls a year for enforcement complaints that we go out and find out there's really no enforcement matter for us. Because we don't know until sometimes we see it. So number one, first you have to usually see it. So sometimes we get pictures, sometimes we don't. So
Yeah.
So first off, usually there's a compliance inspection, and a lot of times we get reports that sound much more salacious than the issue at hand might be. People said
This is salacious.
I know, just say when you look at it from our officers, they get hundreds of these a year. They got to evaluate to go out which ones they go out to. If they go out and they look at it and say, okay, yeah, you've cleared X amount of trees, but all the stumps remain, our officer would say you have not contravened our regulation, and they would say, so right now, as of date, everything that the stumps and all that is there is not a contravention of our regulation. Unfortunately, there's nothing else we can really do because we don't have any power to do so.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you very much for the response.
Go ahead, please.
I'm going to keep going on that one.
Over to you.
So I'm looking at the mapping for the address that he's talking about, and I'm seeing that the area that was cut is within the regulated zone. So it's yellow on the map. So they've cut trees down in the regulated zone less than 30 meters from the Sharon Creek bed. So the setback wasn't adhered to, but they're allowed to cut trees down so long as the stumps remain?
Tree removal, like cutting the trees off and leaving stump is not regulated by the conservation authorities. We do not regulate tree harvesting.
But if those tree stumps don't hold the soil in on the side of the hill, you're going to have runoff, sediment and erosion and so on, right into your Sharon Creek bed.
Yeah.
Those are the things that developers put siltation and sedimentation control fencing up to prevent. But this is somebody who has deliberately made that situation.
Unfortunately, to the mayor, with something we deal with repeatedly, and it is a gray area that's in with our regulation. I can only regulate what's been given to me in Ontario regulation, and tree removal without leaving the stumps is something I don't have the power to enforce. And as
Okay.
egregious and problematic as it is, I don't disrespect that. It's just a reality of what I'm faced with. I don't have any power to tell them or order them or even bring a violation forward on if they do that.
So under our site alteration and fill bylaw, when people start moving earth on their properties, we can enforce that, and you help, depending on where on the mapping it is, or though I think the province may have changed that on us. But this is heavy equipment operating within the regulated zone.
If they're digging, if they're moving earth or digging,
Okay?
then we can be involved. If it's just the cutting of the trees and they've left everything else, there is nothing I am
Okay.
involved. I know it sounds weak, and unfortunately, it is an area that is a challenge. It is one, and you're fortunate, at least you have better site alteration bylaws as well as tree cutting bylaws. Many of the municipalities in the watershed don't have tree cutting bylaws, and then there's no one left to sort of fend for that.
Well, I've been working on it since 2010 to get a tree bylaw in place. We're getting close, but that's how long it's been. So this was hard for our community to see. And I appreciate your response. And if there's something that we as a municipality can do to help strengthen your abilities to enforce that sort of activity, please let us know, because we'd be certainly on your side. Thank you.
Councillor Foster, go ahead, please.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Not to muddy the waters anymore on this one, but I can't help but think to myself, I understand the part about the stump is there and it helps with erosion, or to prevent. But over years, the stump will rot and then erosion will start. Is there anything that speaks to what happens 25 or 30 years down the road, or am I going too far here?
I wish there was, and that is an accurate assumption, is we are an agent of the Crown, and I implement the regulations of the Crown, and unfortunately, that one is it, and that happens, and we see it. Our biggest one, what the most egregious example, especially on the Lake Simcoe shoreline itself, once the trees are removed and the stumps are left and they're dead, it's amazing how fast a shoreline can erode. It's very frustrating. It is something that we've been advocating, and it's on our list of many things that we're trying to seek changes, but you are correct. Long-term, it can lead to problems. It's just, it falls in those little spots, unfortunately, that exist between different rules and bylaws.
Well, I think we've tackled all of the issues today. Perhaps we'll have a few for another day. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Your knowledge in East Gwillimbury is very much respected. We know that we're in good hands, so thank you very much. I have a motion, Councillor Foster. All those in favor? That's carried. I'm sure other people are wanting to shift perhaps around a little bit. Chair Emerson, I just wanted to thank you for attending today. I know the hours that you put in, and we very much appreciate you being in East Gwillimbury's council chambers. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We brought some good news. Okay, where are we now? We are on G1, which is our council committees, boards, and groups, and we have the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee memo, Mural Unveiling. Who might be? Mr. Karmazin, go ahead, please.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. This memo is from our Arts and Cultural Committee of Council. Parks, Rec and Culture serves as a staff liaison to the Committee of Council. This is a good news story where the Arts and Cultural Committee has worked with staff at the Huron Heights Arts Program to introduce public art at a utility structure adjacent to an event space here at the Civic Precinct. The Huron Heights Arts Program supports high school age art students from East Gwillimbury, and the public art created acknowledges and celebrates the rich farming history here in East Gwillimbury. The Arts and Cultural Committee of Council is seeking to work with our farmers market to plan an unveiling of the art at the 2024 market season.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Lahey, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. I understand that the chair of the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee is joining us virtually, and I would like to, through you, Madam Mayor, invite her to make a few comments on this, if possible.
Thank you, Councillor Lahey. Can everyone hear me okay? Sorry, I'm at a conference and I'm not sure how the Wi-Fi is here.
We can hear you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I greatly appreciate the support of town staff and everyone involved in working with the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee in helping us bring forward the Arts Huron project to the town. We hopefully, if anyone on council has questions for me, I'm here to answer anything that you wish to pose to me.
I'm not seeing any hands at this time. Councillor Lahey, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. I'm wondering, this is Councillor Lahey speaking, I'm wondering if you could provide a few more details on the process that has led us to this grand unveiling that will take place during the farmers market, so that we can look forward to celebrating all of the hard work of the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee in the multiple projects that they're bringing forward.
Through you, Madam Mayor. We were, through Facebook actually, we saw that Arts Huron, the grade 10 class of visual arts, through Mrs. Carruthers, I believe, we approached them to help us with cladding the lovely gray structure at the Civic Center. We decided that we would like to beautify this. So we submitted an application to the Arts Huron and asked them if their grade 10 students would like to contribute something to the structure that is on our event space, but it's typically where the farmers market is held every week during the summer. So they provided us with an initial sketch, which we reviewed with town staff and was deemed appropriate. So we got the go-ahead to the school to go ahead and create this mural. So over the few months, we were getting update photos, and for sure, actually, one of our committee members, Joy McEwen, her daughter actually worked on the mural as well. So that was nice to see that that happening. So from there, we received delivery of that structure, mural, in the spring, but after classes were completed. And we're looking and hopefully working with the school again for other aspects of bringing forward musicians and artists and drama students and bring them to forward to show us their talent and contribute to our events that are being planned throughout the year. I hope that, sorry, I'm going off the cuff here.
Thank you very much.
Hadn't planned on speaking.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it does answer the question, and I think it reflects a win-win from the hard work of the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee, a win for the youth, a win for artists and young people in the community, and a win for the town of East Gwillimbury with that grey building being beautified for the benefit and enjoyment of the community, especially at the farmers market. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to receive? All those in favor? And that's carried. And we are now, I'm at item H. Everyone else at item H also? Oh, that's good. Good. Okay. So we have one development services presentation regarding economic development update.
Would you like me to take the chair, Madam Mayor?
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have one item, prepared item on the agenda today. Ms. Bégin, did you want to introduce it, please?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. We've taken the opportunity, as we do once every quarter or so, to bring an update on economic development activities. As members of committee are aware, the primary success measure for economic development is job creation, and we tackle this in a number of ways. One being to attract new investment and new companies that bring with them new jobs. The other is to support existing companies to expand and grow and thereby create new jobs. And another is to support entrepreneurs in the creation of their own jobs. And then there are a host of activities that this team undertakes to support those objectives. And all of these things lead to benefits such as development charges, taxes, and new dollars being circulated into the economy. So our Manager of Economic Development, Brendan Kenny, is here today to talk to you about some of those initiatives.
Take it away, Mr. Kenny.
Now it is. Fantastic. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. Very excited to see all of you, and very excited to bring the passion of economic development into our lives for our quarterly update. Next slide, please. So we've been quite productive in the first quarter. We try to come to you on a quarterly basis and share what's going on with us. I always like to start with, we are your sales and marketing leads. Think of us in economic development as out here pounding the pavement, attracting investment to the community and pushing what's happening in this community to new heights. So from an industrial perspective, from an institutional or commercial perspective, we are the main point of contact for the community. We are client focused, and we use data as a foundation for everything that we do. And you'll see a lot of the data that goes into the activities. We feel confident when we have data behind us to share that with our entrepreneurs, and they need that. And we try to tell people, we're not here to sell you necessarily on the community, even though we're in sales. We are here to help you make an educated and informed decision. So we work through that. We're going to talk a little bit about local business engagement, of which we have several streams. We're going to talk about investment attraction, as Ms. Bégin mentioned, and a little bit on broadband expansion. Next slide, please. So as I said, data as a foundation. We want to build long-standing relationships with our clients, which is our businesses, our entrepreneurs, our investors, our developers, people that are seeking a community in which to make an investment. And we do this through technology in a lot of cases. And so we worked really closely with our IT team to implement a CRM and marketing software, and a lot of great things are going to come from that. So we're tracking development inquiries very closely. We're tracking the interactions that we have with businesses, because often you can talk to a business 7-8 times in a year. And so how do we go through the history and go from individual knowledge, as I say, that's sort of floating in each of our individual heads, to institutional knowledge that we can all share with our colleagues in development services and across the organization. We were able to launch a business newsletter in January. And we've always had that sort of one-to-one presence with our business community. Now we have a one-to-one or a one-to-many proactive presence on a bi-weekly basis. And we have no lack of stories, no lack of news. We try and keep council smiling faces as we do celebrations at the forefront in those to give props where they're due. We have 350 business contacts to start. But the third point in this slide is going to build that list as well. York Region is going out this summer. They've hired a slew of students to go with boots on the ground and calling and other things. with their employment survey, which they do on a bi-yearly basis, biannual basis, and that is going to build and refresh our email contact list, because emails disappear, people get different jobs, just corporate emails especially change over time. So we love to refresh that, and we love having the partnership with York Region to do that. Next slide, please. For local business engagement, we use the short form BRNE, which is business retention and expansion. We want to retain what already exists, and we want to expand if they wish. We had 337 business interactions in the first quarter. And these are not, hey, I'm going to respond to an email. They could be, but for the vast majority, they are 30, 60, 90-minute chats in some cases with a business over and over, a new business every so often. And we performed 18 formal business interviews. These are longer, more detailed, very data-driven. We did them with the Economic Development Advisory Committee. We'll continue to do those as we see their Q2 focus is to get into our larger industrial businesses. We want to talk to our agricultural producers as well. Some very exciting projects happening on the agricultural side with York Region, performing a strategy and other things. We want to get into that. And always we want to have the best intel for industrial so we can connect them for expansion opportunities and the like. Brittany, my colleague, Brittany Stevenson-Byers, is featured prominently on this slide. Just some of the feedback that we've been getting from some of the businesses, as she's been the main point of contact. We've kind of split duties where we dabble on both sides, but Brittany is the main local business lead, whereas I deal with the sort of strategic investment attraction and others as well. Next slide, please. Many councillors, again, smiling faces featured prominently. New funding announcement, April 4th, from the ministry. We had Carolyn Mulrooney there at Y-Space in Georgina, where we announced $150,000 in additional funding to the end of March 2026 to continue the Y-Space program, which is a partnership with York University. That is fundamental to everything that we do. We have really strong EG participation. You can see, over 100 participants in a 14-week program. That's a huge commitment for people, but we have people signing up all the time. We're doing Ask Me Anything sessions. We're doing office hours, and what office hours is in a blender is you come in, there's an expert that wants to talk to you in depth about your business. Not going to work in your business, but will help you work on the business. And there's a difference there in that we're not going to do your sales for you, but we will put you in the best position to be able to do sales for yourself, for example. Next slide, please. Digital Main Street was a program that the province unfortunately ended as of March 31st of this year, but we were able to get in under the wire and achieve $20,000 of grant funding. So this did not cost us a dime outside of staff time. And we were able to get to over 50 businesses over the first 3 months of this year. That's separate from business interactions. And essentially what the program was digital consultations, Google business listings. The first thing somebody's going to throw in is hairdresser East Gwillimbury. Well, if you don't have a business listing, you're not going to show up on that list. So how do we fix that? And 360 storefront photography. Often what we see as a barrier to local businesses, I know what I'm going to get when I walk in Walmart. I know that the departments are here and here and here, and they sell this and this and that. And they may have an online business sort of inventory listing or whatever. Local businesses often do not have this. So that sort of photography breaks down the barrier and say, I know a little bit at least about what I'm going to expect when I walk into that business. We are going to continue the vast majority of these services through Y-Space. So those consultations will continue. We're not going to get provincial funding necessarily for it. We're not going to hire a separate squad of people that is often part of that program. But we do have Y-Space support for that. And so we'll continue to be able to go into businesses and support them digitally. Next slide, please. Again, smiling faces. So business celebrations, we wanted to renovate this program completely. So you'll see we wanted to give council, as we do with staff, the tools and resources that they need to succeed when they go out and celebrate a business. So new ribbon, new scissors. We have a partnership with Neighbor Media to take excellent photography, create content. They're your main point of contact at those. Because what we've now done is we go in often before the celebration and we have a much more detailed conversation with the business. Whereas at the celebration, we were sort of competing for time a little bit. They have a lot of needs on that time. On that day, whether it be with council or the media or everything else, we're able to go in there and have a very detailed conversation with them and sort of diagnose and triage their needs. So a better sort of foot on the relationship. Whether it be a new business starting up, we had the Maverick, which is a home-based business. We're agnostic on how you operate. Here, as Tipsy Goose obviously is a new retail establishment. You're going to see more and more of these because on the development side, it's not a jump to say there will be hundreds of new businesses in this community over the next several years as new retail space comes in. So we're going to keep you all very busy. Next slide, please. From an investment attraction standpoint, we've submitted a funding application to the Rural Economic Development Program through the province. Same program that supports Y-Space. We're going back for more. And this will be for talent and workforce persona and attraction. So we know that we have substantial growth in East Gwillimbury. We know that the pipes are now coming a little bit more officially. If we can impact 1%, 2%, 10% of the people that are coming here and bring them with the right skills or the skills that our businesses need from Toronto or elsewhere where most people are moving from, we think we can make a real impact on our workforce. There's a bunch, that's an oversimplification of everything that's going on in that program, but that's sort of the idea, is to sort of guide the skills that are coming into East Gwillimbury. We're often a matchmaker. So we had 16 development-related inquiries. This is all reactive. We have no marketing in the marketplace right now. We have no proactive. We're working on all those packages actively inside. But those related inquiries, we play matchmaker between the entrepreneurs who are dealing with essentially a 0% vacancy rate in East Gwillimbury, nowhere to go, essentially, with the people and the developers that are bringing space online. And often the best connection is ahead of when those things are built. We don't want to see the for lease sign in, we want these to be full as they open. So we play the matchmaker there, and we understand there will be franchises and there will be, the Dollaramas of the world and those types of things. Those are good, still good businesses, but we want the local entrepreneurs and local businesses alongside them. Long-standing commitment to that, better wages. It's not just creating a job, it's creating sort of an economy locally of businesses. We also have, and this sort of our overall brand is Advantage EG. So think of us as a concierge. Think of us as your A to Z. We're non-technical. We're not going to, we sometimes project manage, as I mentioned here, some key development sites from the ICI perspective. But we're not planners, we're not engineers, we're not builders. We are supporting that process. We are client-focused. We are customer service. So that's the focus there. Next slide, please. So what's next? I already alluded to our investment readiness package. We're working on what that might look like from a web perspective. That's sort of TBD at this point. Working on the talent attraction. And then notably, again, data being a foundation, retail and service demand data. So often we'll get developers that will come in and say, well, we don't actually need retail there. We want to build residential. We don't need as much there. And we don't necessarily have the data to come back to it. They'll bring a consultant in. The consultant will say, oh, well, actually, the demand says that in East Gwillimbury as a whole, you need commercial, but not necessarily in this specific location. So that study will look at what is Holland Landing's demand, what is Queensville's demand, what is Mount Albert's demand, all these specific areas, the Green Lane sort of Highway 11 area, so we can back data with data, have strong opinions, and be able to make really good conclusions and recommendations to council for consideration. Next slide, please. For the small business support side, we're working on peer-to-peer networking. We're working on digital literacy. We get the full spectrum of entrepreneurs, people that maybe are qualified doctors but have no idea how to run a business, or somebody that's never run a business actually looking at, well, what does East Gwillimbury need? And I'm considering every option. We have people that don't know how to use computers. We have people that work in technology and everywhere in between. So we work through that. So that's all through Y-Space. And next slide, please. And a couple things to end. So the YorkNet fiber expansion, basically the update is they're working on construction actively. A lot of that construction is happening a little bit throughout, a lot in Georgina. Georgina's probably going to get lit up. There's sort of two pieces to it. Obviously, we know YorkNet that's putting the fiber in the ground and doing the construction and working on that. And then there's the Galaxy Internet Service Provider that they've partnered with. Those are the people that you're going to see the marketing from in your mailbox that says sign up for internet services, $39.99 a month. And so it's two sides. We got to get the fiber in the ground. We got to make the connections. We'll likely start seeing that in East Gwillimbury mailboxes in 2025. So that's sort of their timeline and into 26. So areas without service, areas with low level of service, we're working through that. We're working on a development video series. We have a lot of what I would call inexperienced people in the development scheme. They know how to run businesses, are perfectly qualified people, but they've never done a minor variance or they've never done a development application. So we want to help them with that, break down those barriers, do a sort of a series, put it on YouTube, put it on our website, help them with that. And then something we came off this morning, actually, we did a familiarization tour with development services staff. We brought them to every corner of the community. Started the operations center, went down through our industrial area out to Mount Albert, back over to Sharon, up to Queensville, Holland Landing, and everywhere in between. And we're going to do that for all town staff. We're going to make that available to them. We think that being connected to the community gives us better customer service, allows people context. We always have turnover in staff, and we think there's an opportunity here to all become ambassadors of East Gwillimbury as we go. So we're really excited about those. And next slide, I think, brings us to the end, and happy to take your comments or questions. And thank you for the time.
Thank you. I'm feeling dizzy with all of the activity that you've been doing. Members of committee, any questions? Go ahead, Councillor Lahey.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. Last week, it was an exciting opportunity when all of council went on a tour of the Loblaws Advanced Distribution Centre, and it's really quite mind-blowing. And so we're looking forward to the opening of that in the first quarter of 2025. And one of the gentlemen there who was facilitating the presentation and tour, Mr. Christopher Delisle of Witron Automation, he suggested that there was going to be a job fair for EG residents within the next coming weeks. And so I was hoping that you could speak to some details about how residents of East Gwillimbury can take advantage of the opportunity of the job fair for jobs right here in East Gwillimbury.
Sure. Through you, Madam Mayor. So we're working with them. We don't necessarily have the final details on day and place and date and all of those things, but workforce is a challenge in East Gwillimbury. I think I presented some data on my last presentation where we don't have a ton of people that are working and living in the same community. In fact, I think in the last census, and again, it was in flux with COVID, but 1,800 people we go to a usual place of work and we live and work in East Gwillimbury. Not a ton. Loblaw is certainly going to help with that. We work with our employment partners. We'll work with anybody to perform those types of things. So TBD, but the council will be getting the update in community where communication is sort of the fundamental building block of economic development. So we'll certainly broadcast that widely once we have the details.
Thank you very much. And one further question, and this is with regard to the Y Space. And it was a pleasure being there during the provincial announcement of another $150,000 to support the work that Y Space is doing. And the physical space is there in Georgina. And so I was curious, what are the chances that one day, through those partnerships, that East Gwillimbury will get a physical space for their business development?
Thank you for the question. Through you. It's something that we're actively interested in. Nothing on the books yet, but it is something that we're actively working towards. We understand that there's as I said, a spectrum of entrepreneurs, a spectrum of space needs as well for East Gwillimbury businesses. Co-working, for example, or shared office space, or that's essentially what that space is in Georgina. People can come in, whether you're accessing the service or you simply want to work out of some place that isn't your basement or whatever. So we're looking at that. It is something that's in our work plan to investigate.
Very good. One suggestion, just my last point, is I'm just thinking outside of the box right now. With the opening of the Health and Active Living Plaza, would there be any opportunities to have any office space there? Is that a possibility?
We'll investigate any and all opportunities.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Lahey, there's actually workrooms that residents and library card holders can book right now in the Holland Landing branch and in the Mount Albert branch. So there already are spaces that entrepreneurs can book and hold meetings and not have to pay a red cent.
Right. Well, just to follow up, my point was, through you, Madam Chair, whether or not there could be a permanent physical location for another Y Space branch. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Councillor Crone, and then Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our presenter. It's exciting times here. Since I was first elected, I've always been an enthusiastic supporter and advocate for economic development in our town, and I feel like we're on the cusp of some really great stuff that's just cooking in town, and I think the best is yet to come. What, in your opinion, what is the greatest obstacle that we have in this town that might be holding us back a little more than it should?
To you, Madam Mayor, I have many opinions on that, but I mean, number one, first and foremost, is servicing. I mean, that's just the most obvious one from an investment standpoint. I don't think it's a stretch to say that we could recreate very easily what's happening on Highway 400 in Bradford with the servicing along Woodbine and elsewhere. It's not a demand side issue, honestly. We have lots of interest, especially if we go down to the marketplace and we're targeting specific types of employment or whatever. It's not going to be a demand issue because people are hungry for the investment in Canada and Ontario, specifically York Region, is out there pounding the pavement. It really is an infrastructure challenge for us.
Okay, I appreciate that. And one last question, if I might. What is it that the folks up here, what can we do to help make your job easier?
I was going to say, it sounds like a blank check. Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. I think everybody would be envious of getting that question. For me, I think it's still supporting, the policy and, sort of the investment in economic development, I think is sort of the fundamental piece. I think we're mid-build of our team, I would say, so to speak. We're looking for more horsepower from a communication or marketing type standpoint or from a business support lead generation standpoint. And to help grow the sort of client side, I think, and sort of managing those relationships over time. So that's something that we're looking at. It's not always a money thing, it's sometimes a time thing. And so I think we've been very lucky to have a pretty healthy economic development budget here and still kind of building that sort of time capacity over time.
Thank you. Councillor Carruthers and then Councillor Johns.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to your comments about the broadband expansion. And so some of the roads, they've put the fiber in the ground, and you're saying that it's just going to sit there for a year with nothing happening with it, and then they're going to start coming back and coming up the driveways? Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's not necessarily a let's apply it to every specific situation. Okay. And oftentimes, even though there's fiber that's necessarily going through, there may need a connection point or something else that goes into it. So what you see is not often what you get in the end point. But I know I think it's bi-monthly, I'm having a conversation with Galaxy, the internet service provider, to stay as up to date as possible, working with a broadband working group as well. To stay up to date on those issues. So once we know, everybody will know as soon as possible. But it's not necessarily a blanket statement that can be applied to every single situation.
Okay, because it's a question I do get from our residents, especially when they're trying to work from home and they don't have access to high-speed internet. And they got all excited when they saw the broadband coming down the road, and they spent many weeks working on that, and I don't want to go back to them and say, no, you're going to be waiting another year. So if we can get some more specifics so I can know what to tell people, because they are expecting it any day now. They understand the difference between it running down the road and it coming up their driveway, but I don't think they're going to understand if there's a year wait between it going down the road and it coming up the driveway. So if we get more specifics, that would be much appreciated. Thanks.
And if I may, YorkNet is very responsive to those sort of inquiries directly from residents as well. So that would be an ideal place to send as well.
It also sounds like there's a built-in customer base for Galaxy.
Yes.
Ready to go. Councillor Johns.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My question relates to, you were talking about relationships and collaboration. We recently went through the amalgamation of our East Gwillimbury Chamber with the new Central York Chamber of Commerce, and I'm just wondering to hear a bit of feedback on where you, how you feel the relationship is going, and then what your thoughts on for the future and what this could look like, what growth means for East Gwillimbury in an amalgamated relationship like that.
That's great, through the mayor, and thank you for the question. I think it's added horsepower, honestly, to our Chamber of Commerce. The Central York Chamber has many more staff that are working in specific areas that I think will sort of tie over to East Gwillimbury. They have specific membership support and they have specific event support. Another thing, they were able to maintain and retain the executive director of the East Gwillimbury Chamber, so we had a bit of continuity there. I've chat with Chris Emanuel on a bi-weekly basis at minimum on events they want to bring here. They're hosting, I think, their first one coming up in East Gwillimbury. If you don't have the invite, I can definitely share that with council. So I think it's very rosy for the future. It's nice, and when you see a community evolve in economic development, it's often the municipality that takes the lead first and does a lot of the economic development activities that a chamber might do, or a BIA might do, or name the organization. And we're a bit of an economic development desert in East Gwillimbury, and that a lot of the services happen in Newmarket or in Georgina or elsewhere. And to see a little bit more service coming into here and a little bit more horsepower outside of the municipality, I think says that we're evolving as a community.
And to Councillor Lahey's point, if there was a way for us to create a physical space, whether that's municipally run or a partner run, then that, I think, would also be helpful to create that, that economic development space, whether it's your department or someone else. So, thank you, everyone. Any further questions for Mr. Kenny? Seeing none, may I have a motion to receive his presentation from Councillor Crone? All those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you very much. That's the end of our prepared agenda. Ms. Bégin, do you have anything further to add?
Nothing further this time, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I will, members of committee, anything to raise under this area? Councillor Lahey?
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. In my capacity last meeting, council meeting and CWC meeting on April 9th, a lot of the discussion was around the Acorn development in the Heritage House. And we left it with staff, as far as my understanding was, that you would be having further conversations and continue the dialogue in a collaborative manner to try and find some solutions to that situation. And so I would like an update as to how those conversations are going. Thank you.
Ms. Bégin?
Through you, Madam Chair, there's been no further discussion at this point, so we anticipate that there may be opposition to the intention to designate, but we've not received that as yet. So.
For clarity, through you, Madam Chair, it was my understanding through the conversation, the way it went, that that staff, it was implied, according to the chair, that staff would be having conversations with Acorn Development. When I suggested that we put that in writing, it was said that it was implied that there was, through the observations of another councillor and comments, that it was implied that the conversation would be ongoing.
And through you, Madam Chair, we certainly will pursue that as time and capacity permits, so we will be following up. So.
It's an active application. There's obviously going to be conversations.
Well, okay, so just for everyone's clarity, and can you remind us again what the timeline is, how many days that we had? There were numerous dates, 60 days, 90 days from this point to that point. How many days do we have since left for those conversations?
Through you, Madam Chair, the applicant has 30 days to respond to the notice of intention to designate. And so that period is still ongoing. And then at such time, if they do move forward with an objection, then we'll bring it back to council for consideration of next steps. There have been some conversations sort of related to this development around potential locations for heritage buildings, whether they be on the property of other private developers or potentially tied to considerations around the civic precinct. So we're open to exploring all options at this point to see what we can do to preserve that facility.
Thank you, Ms. Bégin.
Yes.
Okay, anything else? Councillor Crothers.
Just a bit of a point of order. That item wasn't on our agenda, and so I have questions around that, but I wasn't prepared to ask them here because that wasn't something that was on our agenda. And so I just want to get a little bit of clarification. If we're getting walk-on staff oral reports, we need to have a bit of a heads up so we can declare conflict at the beginning of the agenda and or prepare a question. So I just want to be mindful of that moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yes. It's my understanding that when you ask at the end of a department whether there are any other questions for the general manager, that it's a most appropriate opportunity to raise questions. Thank you.
I think there's a difference between asking a question and asking for a verbal report. And I think that was just the distinction that was being made there. So seeing no other items on our agenda today, I'm going to turn the chair back to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. We are now at Engineering and Public Works with Councillor Lahey in the chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. There is one item on the agenda today, and it is a memo regarding the industrial, commercial, institutional, sanitary allocation update. Can I have a mover for this, please? Thank you very much, Councillor Crone. And General Manager Molinari, would you like to speak to this item, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. We're actually very fortunate to have had a couple of really great presentations earlier today on this particular item. And, I think two of the items that this memo really is bringing to council's attention is really just a memo or a letter that we prepared to the region, asking for some ICI allocation, which, from the great news that we heard today, we're hoping that we'll be very successful with that. And secondly was with regards to a water project along Woodbine Avenue that would help to assist with some of our water quality issues and also support some ICI and further development along the Woodbine corridor. So this memo is really here today for council's information in order to move forward with some very important projects that would help the town move forward with its economic development plan and our servicing plan. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Molinari. Are there any questions from council for Mr. General Manager Molinari? I think that since we discussed it earlier, and it is a great news story, so thank you very much. It will be short and sweet in the Engineering and Public Works Department today. Seeing no other questions, can I have a vote? All those in favor of receiving this? Thank you very much. It has carried. And are there any other questions for General Manager Molinari in this department? Seeing none, I'll return the chair back to you, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're at item J, Legal and Legislative Services, with myself, the chair. I'll turn it over to Legal Services.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My role is very simple today because our Deputy Clerk, Mr. Walkham, will be dealing with both items on our agenda. So I'm going to turn it over to our very capable Deputy Clerk. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. Just a brief introduction of the first report. Staff worked with our colleagues in the Planning Department and Information Management as well to conduct an analysis on the estimated current ward populations and also forecasting the populations out to 2026. Staff used the guidelines that we do have, which are generally accepted, on a 25% variation from the average ward size to determine if the wards were still within that accepted range. And so the initial analysis shows that the ward populations won't deviate beyond that accepted range within the timeline that we looked at, which is going out to that 2026 election timeframe. So for the report, we're recommending for council to maintain the current ward boundaries at this time. And then further, to develop some further guidelines to guide staff and council in the future on reviewing ward boundaries in this way. And that would be with the goal of replacing the current practice, which has been to do it automatically after every election. So happy to answer any questions from council.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will assume responsibility for the clause in that resolution that said that we would look after it after every election, because I didn't want us to be setting the ward boundaries and then never looking at them again. And so that was the reason why it's in there. I think it was also because at the time our growth was projected to be dramatic and very local, hyper-local. And so we wanted to make sure that we maintained that voter parity. So if you're going to be bringing back a framework that would flag things so that when our population did start to spike, or that our administrative staff felt that it was time for a review, I'm happy to take a look at that. But that's the history of it anyway. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I think that this is good that this is coming up. I think that a ward boundary review is very much, I see it as a governance review. I am not interested in changing, to seeing any changes to the ward boundaries. I think that, to Councillor Roy-DiClemente's point, the the fact is that we're stagnant in our population growth, so why should we look at changing the way that we're being represented at the ward level? I will say that I debated talking about this because I'm not sure what the timing is for this, but the fact is that this is on the agenda now, and what we just went through, given your absence, and I mean, honestly, sorry, I just said your absence, it's really in any person's absence. I think that it shone a light in an opportunity to look at what continuous improvement looks like in buttressing a governance structure. I think that for a municipality or residents to see 3 different acting mayors in essentially 6 months, I think that for the clunkiness of us trying to figure out who's going to represent us at the region and then having 2 different motions and us trying to figure that out, for us appointing the positions, I think that, and especially for that period of time, I think that the power should very much rest with the people versus us appointing and us changing like that. And I mean, those are my opinions, and that's why we have debate up here to hopefully encourage discussion around this about what better looks like. And I believe that an elected deputy mayor is in the future of East Gwillimbury is a step forward for better. I think that the power should rest with the people, and I think that us having moving acting mayors, us having appointing moving acting mayors, us not having clarity on who's sitting at the region, I just think it's good to have clarity. And like what I would like to see, and I see that there's 3 items to the motion. I'm in favor of not spending $60,000 on consultants. I'm in favor of status quo. I would like to see a report come back from staff on what other municipalities do in situations like ours, where we have councillors in a ward system, and where an elected deputy mayor would enter the picture. And so I don't want to see consultants, but I would like to see a report come back from staff to help us better understand, so we can think about what that looks like in the future.
Thank you. I understand the intention of where Councillor Johns is going, and I'm wondering if we have questions around the role of acting mayor, if that is best addressed under our procedural bylaw review, and perhaps we can move that conversation to that. I'm seeing some nods from staff. If that's okay with you, Madam Mayor.
Follow up from Councillor. I actually was referencing the acting mayor position as the challenge. My request was for an elected deputy mayor position. It wasn't about acting mayor. Just a point of clarification.
Councillor Lahey, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. I too like to see that we can save the taxpayers $60,000 and not hire an external consultant. I think that if we're going to look at maintaining the existing ward boundaries, or in the future at some point looking towards, according to the population, a change in those wards, I think that at that same time there need to be other variations and options explored as well. One of the variations or options that is mentioned in the staff report that is before us is the dissolution of the ward system and the possible return to an at-large system. My experience so far on council has been that both residents and sometimes councillors are confused about ward boundaries and the fact that we all have equal votes, all 6 of us on council, and we all vote on matters that pertain to all of East Gwillimbury, that it may be beneficial beneficial in the future to return to the ward system if we're exploring options of changing how we operate. And speaking to Councillor John's point about being the power resting with the people, then I would suggest that in the next election there could be the opportunity to have a referendum, and the staff could craft very specific questions, and then that way democracy would be being pursued in its most healthiest form of having a referendum in the next election to answer some of these questions if we want to hear what the voice of the people is. Thank you very much. That's my suggestion.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Councillor Roy-DiClemente, go ahead, please.
Madam Mayor, you and I have been, you more so than myself, have been up and down this street, back and forth. I'm not interested in revisiting at this time, in revisiting our award system. We have a unique circumstance. It was a made in East Gwillimbury solution, and I think at this point it's working for us. We have had a referendum already in the past on this, and I'm not interested in reopening that. I'm not interested in adding another elected official to this body. There isn't room at this table, and there isn't room in our annual budget for another talking head. And from my perspective, if staff feel that they can include some guiding principles about when we might consider an elected deputy mayor or dissolution of, or redrawing ward boundaries, then maybe that can be incorporated into their discussion, and we can advise of that when the time comes. But right now, this structure is still relatively new for us. It's only been 1.5 terms, I think, that we've really functioned in this structure, and there was a great deal of consternation when we moved to this. More so just because change was challenging, and I think if we are able to establish some familiarity as our new residents are coming in and getting to know us and getting to know the town, then that will go a long way. So I'm not interested in reopening it, but if staff are coming back to us with a framework, then we can incorporate some of that into the framework and or through the discussion of the procedural bylaw. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's always good to look to the future and be prepared for what change may happen. But I would go along with, and I was going to suggest it, so I'm as well, and Councillor Roy-DiClemente. I think we mentioned that we could, I think, incorporate into that we look, at the motion, the second part of the motion. I agree with everyone. We don't need to spend $60,000 to look at our ward boundaries. The numbers don't call for it, so let that one go. But going forward, we could say, when you look at the second part of the motion here, the council requests staff to establish framework of guiding principles and criteria to determine when a ward boundary change is needed and how it may be and how it will be conducted. Maybe we say ward boundary change and council composition, or something to that effect. Smarter people here at the table can help wordsmith that. But I like the idea of let's maybe expand it a bit and see what we can do to look at what might be coming down the road at us. That's my 2 cents. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Lahey, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Further to the conversation about ward boundaries, I would like to see, because I sometimes see things differently, but I always am following up with comments from residents in the community, is that I would like to have a better understanding of how we compare to other municipalities. There are other municipalities, they have ward systems, but they do not have 2 councillors for every ward system. And so if there is any discussion in the future of creating new wards, then I think there also needs to be a discussion of, rather than duplicating the number of councillors in each ward, reducing to 1 councillor per ward in the future. I think there are many options, and I think this is worthy of further exploration. But ultimately, the people know what's best, and I don't think we can ever go wrong if we had a referendum question at the next election regarding how they want to see us pursue the future here as council. Thank you.
Councillor Foster, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to try to simplify this a little bit again. I know that the CAO and I have had pretty much this exact chat a couple of times. I'm just wondering, maybe Mr. Valchik can help us out. Have we done anything to start to prepare ourselves to have a look at, you know, how this will work in the future? Have we looked at other municipalities to see what works and what doesn't? You know, especially with regards to the acting mayor schedule. Everybody knows that I wasn't in favor when we were thrown into a difficult spot in the last few months. Have we done anything, or is there a possibility that you're already working away at a report that may be coming to council sooner rather than later?
Madam Mayor, I think there's a whole host of points being made, so I'm not aware of us having a report that covers the myriad of perspectives that are being shared right now. What I am hearing, though, is there's an opportunity to reflect on some of the current practices in relation to business continuity, and is there opportunities to look at maybe a slightly different way of what the membership of council would look like to provide better clarity around business continuity in the event of needing alternate representation and that sort of thing. I'm also hearing that staff are at least suggesting that we come back with some ideas for you on what might be some appropriate triggers that would warrant us initiating a more comprehensive review of something like ward boundaries, so that in fact we don't necessarily need to do it every term if in fact the parameters look very similar to what they were last term. Then we would not think it would be good use of public money to invest significant amounts into a comprehensive review when our preliminary findings are quite clear. However, we should have a sense of if those preliminary findings go outside of what the deputy clerk indicated was maybe a range of reasonableness, then in fact we would come back to council and say, it's our suggestion. It doesn't mean that you must. It just means at that point we would come back and say, we think it would be very advisable to initiate a review around boundaries. And then the other issues around composition and what the positions might be and that sort of thing, that's absolutely something that staff can continue to review what other municipal practices are and come back at some appropriate time with just, if nothing else, information for you to contemplate in terms of how others are operating and you know, what success looks like in other places. So absolutely, these are things that we can do. I think the recommendations that you have before you today are to not pursue a comprehensive ward boundary review at this point. We don't think it's good use of the money, which is why, by the way, we have not started to initiate spending of the capital project that council approved. We don't automatically spend because it's there. We spend if we feel we need to, and in this case, we don't feel we need to. And then we'd like to come back to you with some further thoughts on what those triggers might look like for future reviews. And in the meantime, there is a procedure bylaw review that is ongoing, and there may be some opportunity to incorporate some value-add suggestions into that process as well. So those would be some of the comments I would share.
Yeah, I agree with everything that, thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with everything that our CEO said in spirit. I mean, we keep coming back to procedure, and I really, in my heart of hearts, actually do believe that this is a governance issue. Like, when we again, I'll say we 3 acting mayors in 6 months, none of them compensated, so they weren't compensated for the role, and there wasn't rules around that. When I was in the role, I had questions on what is the authority of the acting mayor and the scope of work that should have been entailed. Like, should you be having conversations with the region? I was in positions to vote at the region whereby I was not elected to be at the region, but I was there and appointed through this council. It also took us multiple motions to figure out how that would occur. And so I really, in my heart of hearts, don't believe that this is a procedural question in regard to a deputy mayor or acting deputy mayor or acting mayor, whatever you want to call it. I do believe that this is a governance issue that needs to be strengthened within the municipality. And my bandwidth or intelligence is not the one that should be deciding that. I do believe that what we should be doing is simply receiving a report back from staff that they're reviewing other GTA HA municipalities that have ward systems already, that have deputy mayors, and how they're elected and or chosen. I'm not saying that that I'm sitting here having the answer, but Councillor Crone, myself, and Councillor Lahey all spent time in an acting mayor position, and I don't think that there was, I think staff did an incredible job of supporting us. I'll say that loud and clear, and I'll say that multiple times, but I think that from the maturity or the maturation of East Gwillimbury, we were in a very challenging spot. We were, again, having people doing work without compensation. We were having people representing at the regional level without having been elected to the regional level seat. We did not understand the scope of work. And there was debate over whether it should be chairing meetings, whether it should be advancing the town business. And the fact is that I'm simply asking for this in order to gather more information, not to make a decision. And so that's what I'm looking for, and I'm hoping I could have some support of my other councillors.
Madam Mayor, I'll just make one brief comment, and I know you've got other members of council want to speak to this. Certainly, staff could absolutely come back with information in that regard. And quite frankly, sometimes when you go through circumstances that you haven't previously, it provides you an opportunity to kind of road test some of your current practices, protocols, talk about things like business continuity, and it allows you to explore opportunities for improvement. And so we'd be happy to come back with some more information in that regard if that's council's will.
Councillor Chair.
Thank you. The other thing I thought I would mention is that as we start to grow again, our population numbers will start to reach that of other York Region municipalities who are not going to be growing quite as quickly. And so our representation and our voter parity issues will be greater when we look at the regional level. So when we look at other municipalities, some of them have one representative and others have two. And by default, those two representatives, that second representative at the region becomes the deputy mayor and those sorts of things. And so we are very quickly, not this cycle, but within the next two cycles, are going to start to see our population step above some of the other municipalities in York Region. So this is I think this is a bigger question. And what I would like to see, I'd like to support Councillor Crone's suggestion that the last clause of this resolution simply be amended to read that council requests staff to establish a framework of guiding principles and criteria to determine when a ward boundary or change in council composition is needed and how it will be conducted.
Councillor Lahey, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. With regard to when the last referendum was held, that must have been longer than 10 years ago, back in time. I would like some more information about that because I cannot recall when the last referendum was held and any questions put on the voters' ballot. But I think that this is an opportunity whenever the next election takes place, that a question be put forward or multiple questions be put forward so that we can have direct feedback from the residents and taxpayers of East Gwillimbury as to how they would like to see the future shaped in terms of council in East Gwillimbury. And with regard to the amendment, I think that both Councillor Foster and Councillor Johns have brought up good points about clarity of governance, and that we should work on the wording some more before we vote on this resolution.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, based on the discussion, I don't think that there is a desire to explore buttressing the governance structure. I'm disappointed by that. I'm disappointed because I was asking for a report. And it is very clear amongst my colleagues that it won't carry. So, yeah, I'm disappointed that it didn't want to be explored.
Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm not saying, I never said I didn't want to discuss. I'm trying to keep us to the agenda, and this is about ward boundaries, and I'm happy to discuss that. Governance is our procedural bylaw. That is what the procedural bylaw is. It is governance, and it fits very nicely there. And we are under a review of our procedural bylaw, and that is the appropriate time to talk about it. I'm seeing nods from staff. That is where we discuss governance. This is strictly about our ward boundaries. I agree with the change to include council composition, and I look forward to that report coming back, and I look forward to a more in-depth discussion about governance when we look at the procedural bylaw. But if we could stick to the agenda, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Lahey, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm thinking that perhaps our town solicitor might have a suggestion as to when we will have the opportunity to go over a draft of the procedural bylaws so that we can further discuss some of these issues. Thank you.
I have one more member of council, with your indulgence. Councillor Crone, go ahead.
Yeah, I was, thank you, Madam Mayor. The only thing I was going to state is that I think when we do I think in my mind it was implied that when looking at the ward boundaries and the composition as to the amendment of that it would incorporate a study of what all the other municipalities are doing within the GTA. And if to Councillor John's point, if we need to spell that out, happy to spell it out. But that would be my expectation that study would be part of the of what staff undertakes. But perhaps our solicitor should answer the other question, Madam Mayor.
Or maybe both.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. All of the comments that have been made in the last 10 minutes or so are all valid questions, and I think I understand Councillor John's distinction between governance and other topics. We've also, undergone a bit of a transition. Mayor Haxon is back, thank goodness, and with everybody's support. The acting mayor grid was in place for some time, and as the CAO said, we had not had an opportunity to road test it. Mayor Haxon, by virtue of her phenomenal health, has, as I understand, I haven't been here very long, but as I understand, she hasn't missed a meeting in a very, very long time. So with that said, this report that's in front of you, it was limited. It was intentionally limited to the issue of addressing the every election. We're going to do a ward boundary review, and it was in front of you to limit it to those that issue alone. But I understand why the conversation goes much broader than that, because there's a lot more at stake. And, you know, we have been undergoing the procedure bylaw update, which is ongoing. As you notice, our clerk is absent with notice, and she remains away at this point in time. So we are short our municipal clerk, so that's something to consider when one is considering when we're coming back with a comprehensive response to the questions raised by Councillor Lahey in the last meeting and this meeting about when we're coming back with the procedure bylaw update. But it's not lost on staff, including myself, speaking with Deputy Clerk Mr. Walkham, who's done a great job on this matter in front of you today. It's not lost on us that it's broader than just simply asking that the review not take place every election. This is a much broader issue, but fundamentally, we can't address it today in this report, and we haven't addressed it in this report. So but we will certainly undertake to address it. I just can't be definitive again on when we're going to undertake a comprehensive response, because to Councillor John's issue about governance, it's not just a staff look at that. It's a comprehensive discussion with members of council as to where you see you want to go with this. And, you know, the review of other municipalities is certainly, you know, within our purview to do and would be in our purview to do as a, you know, without even questioning it. However, every municipality is different. In terms of the regional representation, Councillor Roy-DiClemente has hit the nail on the head with respect to our population will grow once we get our allocation, and that's coming, as we heard today, so we're going to move on that. But that representation at the regional level, yes, there were some bumps in the road in terms of when you were away Mayor Haxon, but future-wise, in looking at that issue, there is, you know, there is always that potential that our representation at the region would be increased due to those parameters that Councillor Roy-DiClemente accurately pointed out. So there's a lot going on here, and I know I've gone on a little bit about this, but I think it's worthwhile talking about it again. I'm in your hands in terms of what council resolution you want to address the broader issues that we're talking about today, but it's not outside of the radar that we've been talking about for some time now because of the circumstances we were faced with in the last 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lahey, go ahead, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor. In the hopes of helping find some clarity on the resolution in front of us, perhaps the wording, rather than in conjunction with every election, we simply replace it with on an as-needed basis, because as far as my understanding goes, the statistics that we are using to claim to be the fastest growing municipality in Canada are based on 2016 to 2021 statistics. And so it will be many, many years before we again see an increase in the population, and other municipalities will be outpacing us rapidly. So perhaps rather than every election, it's on an as-needed basis when staff bring to our attention or councillors feel that it's appropriate, rather than being constrained by the words at every election, having a review. Thank you.
Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
Madam Mayor, I think we're happy with the resolution before us. It doesn't say at every election, it says when needed. And I think we've talked about this for quite extensively. I'd like to call the question, please.
Just say something?
Go ahead.
After hearing the debate, and one councillor was concerned that there was a point of order. I'll just say that I'll step back from that and note that if folks feel that this is not a governance question, even though I do believe that it is, and it will come up again procedurally, then I'm happy to take a step back from my suggestions. And if council wishes to pick this up as it's a procedural question, not a governance, and I was out of order for bringing that up, I will step back from that.
Madam Chair, the question has been called. I don't know if you have someone who has made a motion at this time.
I'm not sure either.
You made an amendment.
I made a suggestion, but I don't know if we actually, it was.
Could you?
I'm happy to move it, that we receive it, that we maintain the existing ward boundaries, and that council request staff to establish a framework of guiding principles and criteria to determine when a ward boundary or change in council composition is needed and how it will be conducted.
Thank you. Questions on this item? All those in favor? It's carried. Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, we do have the second item listed for legal and legislative services. This is the routine outstanding council items list that we do twice per year. Happy to answer any questions about the memo itself, but if there's any questions about the updates contained in the memo, it would be best addressed by the general managers.
Questions? I'm not seeing any. What are our options now that there are no questions, just to receive? Do you move? Thank you. Councillor Crothers moves. All those in favor? And that's carried. Item K is finance with Councillor Johns in the chair. And I think that brings us almost to the end.
Yeah, we're getting there. Item K, so I'm looking for a mover. This is an item for a finance presentation in our unaudited 2023 year-end financial position. So if I can get a mover for that. Councillor Crothers, thank you. Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. Happy to be here to present an overview of the town's financial results for 2023. For the 2023 budget, council approved total expenditures of $59.1 million. $46 million pertain to our 3 operating programs, and $13.1 million pertain to our capital. So this presentation provides an overview of the actual expenditures that were incurred in 2023 in comparison to the budget. And I'm here today with our Director of Finance and Deputy Treasurer Valadima, and I'm going to pass it over to her to go through some of the operating results.
Good to have you with us today.
Thank you. My speaking notes say good morning, but maybe it's good evening.
Somewhere in there.
Madam Mayor, members of committee, staff, and the general public watching, I'm glad to see you're all still awake. It's going to be riveting. Today's presentation will summarize the 2023 year-end position for how the actual financial results compare to the budget. So as you can see from the slide, the year-end position from the tax-supported program area results in an unaudited surplus of $2.1 million. While this may seem like a large surplus, the majority of the surplus is related to one-time events or limited time events and items that should not be included in our base budget in the long term. Further details are shared in the accompanying report to this presentation. However, I will summarize the main areas here. Supplementary taxes, reassessment, and payment in lieu taxes make up approximately 44% of the surplus, or $0.9 million. This revenue is unpredictable in nature and fluctuates year over year.
A further 28% of the surplus, or $588,000, comes from increased revenue from various areas, increased inspections, variance applications, bylaw enforcement, and increased late payment penalties. Within our engineering and public works program, we realized net cost savings of about $405,000, or 19% of this surplus. This relates to limited time funding for winter maintenance and road operations, as well as some additional savings throughout the roads operations branch. Where these savings were anticipated to be more permanent in nature, they were used to offset additional expenses in the 2024 budget for new staff. In the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Department, there was an increase in the volume of program registrations in 2023. Along with this came increased costs for additional instructors and supplies. However, a combination of cost savings throughout the rest of the program, as well as net program revenue increases, resulting in $110,000 of the surplus, or about 5%. Throughout the town, there are a number of cost savings realized in various categories. We've grouped these together. They amount to about 14% of the surplus, or about $287,000. These categories would be reflective of some savings in utilities and water, mostly related to weather. We don't use as much water in the splash park if the sun's not shining. Training and professional development. That's when we have gaps where we have staff availability and available conferences. Things are just starting to get back online from COVID, so we are seeing some savings in 2023 there, but not expected to continue. As well as in our councillor discretionary expenses and advisory committee expenses. We had some savings there. Library operations experienced a one-time surplus of $207,000, mainly relating to temporary staff vacancies. This, in addition to their board-approved purchases from the library operating reserve in the amount of $31,000, was then topped back up to the reserve limit as per the policy and is not included in that $207,000. While we do see cost savings and one-time sources of revenue throughout the town, there are areas of cost increases as well. These offset the surplus by about $236,000, and they were made up of advertising, bank fees, insurance, legal, and contracted services. None of the areas were notably large in nature, but in combination, they do add up. In the areas where these cost increases were expected to continue, the 2024 budget was adjusted to reflect the higher costs. In addition to the increased costs, there were also some areas with reduced developer charge funding. This amounted to about $220,000. This reduced revenue relates to changing legislation on the use of DC funding. However, with the most recent changes, this may change again. We continue to stay informed on the changing legislation and will make updates as appropriate during the 2025 budget if the funding becomes available again. One line that is missing from this slide is the net savings from salaries. It is contained in the report. This is much lower than in previous years and contributes about $31,000, or around 1% of the surplus amount. These savings are a result of staff vacancies and gapping in between hires. Before I move to the next slide, that was a lot of information. I'm happy to pause and take any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions at this point? Clarification? I'm not seeing any. Thank you.
All right. Next slide, please. In our rate-supported area, water and wastewater program, there was a surplus of about $2.3 million. Approximately 57% of this surplus comes from increased user fee revenue. This is a direct result of increased water volumes as well as new accounts. Increases here were accounted for where possible in the 2024 budget. However, water volume usage is difficult to predict on a year-by-year basis. A further 38% of the surplus is related to one-time or limited-time revenue related to drinking water permits, new connection fees, and net proceeds from water meter sales. This revenue is unpredictable and inconsistent and cannot be used when setting rates in the long term. Within the water and wastewater program area, there are also a couple of areas with increased costs, as well as some areas with cost savings. Some of the adjustments were made in the 2024 budget, and these areas continue to be closely monitored and will be adjusted further in the 2025 budget if trends continue. Happy to take those questions.
Councillor Crothers? Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine, go ahead.
Thanks. The increased water volumes, is that not, pardon the pun, a flow-through line that whatever our residents are paying, we're paying the region for the water?
Through you, Madam Mayor. There are costs, so that is the net increase. So it's not just increased volumes, it's new accounts as well. So additional demand on the system.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Oh, one back. There we go. The development fee supported area has fee revenue that is intended to be self-sustaining over time. These reserves fluctuate with varied development activities. The overall draw from reserve is $281,000 rather than the anticipated draw from reserve of $434,000 and is mainly related to the reduction in building activity as well as timing of planning and engineering applications. Happy to take any questions on the fee supported area.
Questions? I'm not seeing any. Go ahead,
Okay.
please.
With that, I will pass it back to Mr. Marshall to talk about capital.
Next slide, please. So in 2023, there were 159 projects that were open with a total available budget of $126.1 million. And of that amount, 94.3 million pertained to the Health and Active Living Plaza. In 2023, the town incurred capital expenditures of $34.2 million, 75% of that, of course, being the Health and Active Living Plaza. At the end of 2023, we closed 55 projects, which meant 104 projects were carried forward into 2024 with a total available budget of $90.3 million. And once again, $68.8 million of that $90 million pertained to the Health and Active Living Plaza. So after carrying forward those 104 projects, we are projecting that by the end of 2024, approximately 85% of those projects will be completed by the end of 2024. So I can pause here and pause for any questions if anyone has any.
Questions? Oh, yes, sorry. Sorry, here, I'm checking my...
Seeing none, back to you, Mr. Marshall.
Next slide, please. So the surpluses that are identified get transferred into the town's reserves. And once those reserves get transferred, the staff propose where those surpluses get allocated and council approves them. And when we recommend where those surpluses should go, we follow 4 basic objectives. So the first one is that the rate and fee supported surpluses go to their respective reserves, because that's what those funds were generated for, so they go back to those reserves. So what's left to allocate is the surplus related to the tax supported program. And what staff do is we do an analysis of what our needs are going to be, and it's based on a couple of areas. One, we produce an uncommitted reserve report that you see at budget time each year, which shows where we're projecting the next year's reserve balances will be going. We also do a 10-year analysis of expenditures and revenues and project where the reserves are going to go, where the balances are going to go. And based on that, any reserves that we see that are going to be going into a negative balance, we try to top up. We also look at the asset management reserves, and we know that some of the budgeted contributions aren't as sufficient as what is needed to sustain our asset management over time. So what we do is try to boost those up as well. So for example, our roads reserve, we contribute about $1 million a year towards roads replacement capital, but we know based on our asset management plan and our 10-year forecast that we're going to need about $2 to $3 million in the next 10 years. So we try to top up as well. And sometimes 2 and 3 overlap, which is an example of the roads reserve, because we know that's going to be going into a negative balance unless we start addressing it. So then finally, we look at the objectives and priorities of council, and we allocate surpluses to that. So for example, back in 2021, we allocated part of our surplus towards implementing a climate reserve. And we've established that as part of council's priority. Next slide, please. So this is staff's proposal for allocating the tax-supported surplus for 2023. And I'll just go through some of the figures for you. So for the park structures, we've proposed an allocation of $250,000. In 2024, there's a projected expenditure of $1 million coming from that reserve. So we've put the $250 in to make sure that it doesn't go into a negative balance. And just want to remind council that as part of the 2024 budget approval, we also established a 1% contribution to asset management, which will go into that park structure reserve to help it, to help sustain it, because there wasn't a contribution dedicated at the time. The library asset replacement reserve, we've allocated $100,000 to it, and that is basically 50% of the library operating surplus generated that year. The $250,000 going to vehicle and equipment replacement due to a couple factors. One, there's going to be a $2 million draw anticipated for 2024, and our long-term forecast shows that without increasing the contribution, it will be going into a deficit by the end of the 10-year period. And also, we're noticing that there's some increased costs associated with acquiring vehicles, so we've allocated some funds to help accommodate that. Our information technology reserve, we've proposed $350,000 towards, and that's to accommodate our continued modernization initiatives. In 2024, we're projecting expenditures of $500,000, and in 2025 and 2026, about $1.4 million. So we've allocated some funding towards that. So, and then finally, our roads tax levy reserve, we've allocated approximately $1.1 million towards that. We have expenditures, bridge repairs of $5 million anticipated or budgeted for 2024, and we know that that reserve will be going into a negative position unless we start addressing that as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that allocation.
Thanks, Mr. Marshall. Councillor Crothers?
Thank you. I'm looking at the library and disappointed to see that only 50% of the surpluses is staying with the library. With the opening of the Healthy Active Living Plaza, it's a huge undertaking for the library. I mean, the help is big for the town in general, but when you look at the library, 2 small branches and now adding 1 huge branch, it's a big step for them. And they're really counting on that surplus to be able to not only do what needs to be done to open the health branch, but also to ensure that the Mount Albert and the Holland Landing branches, that the residents there feel that they're still being looked after as well. So I would like to ask that the money in the surplus from the library stay with the library.
Thank you, Councillor Carruthers. Is there any other discussion, comments? Councillor Roy-DiClemente.
It will come as no shock when you hear that I say I'm in support of that idea.
Could we get an answer, a reply on that? Is it possible to get a reply on that? I could frame it like a question. Is it possible to have the $200,000 surplus from the library maintained with the library reserve?
Go ahead, Mr. Marshall. I think that would require a motion, but you feel free to answer it.
So through you, Mr. Chair. So part of the rationale behind why we only allocated $100,000 towards it was because our 10-year forecast based on the 10-year capital plans that were submitted by the library board showed that the balance that's in the reserve already would be sufficient to cover their 10-year capital needs. So what we did, we looked at other priorities that were pressing, and we allocated some money out of that reserve towards those priorities, and in particular the roads reserve. And we just wanted to make sure that the surplus, some of it was still being retained by the library board. That's why we chose 50%.
Thank you. Having met with the library board just last night, they're looking at that surplus and looking at where it needs to go, and they're not saying roads. So I would ask my other council liaison colleague to weigh in on this if we want to put forward a motion, or if this is something that we're going to let go.
Well, sorry if I could, just we'll both have spoken, and then we'll go around the table, and then we'll go back again for opportunity. So, Councillor Lahey wishes to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Chair. I got all excited when I saw the word surplus, and again, I thought, like some of my other councillors thought, oh, well, I'd like to see it spent here or there. But with respect to your expertise, I will always defer to staff expertise in terms of where they feel the priorities are. I think it's important to remember overall that we are, if I'm correct in my understanding, we are behind in our asset management investment, and we're behind in our infrastructure investment. And very practically speaking, one cannot do extra things beyond the reality of the basics in a library if we do not have roads to get to that library. Is my understanding correct in terms of the prioritization?
So through you, Mr. Chair. So as I showed previously, our objectives that we use when we prioritize our surplus allocation, it's not necessarily that order, but we try to balance it off to make sure that none of the reserves are going to be in a negative position. But it is true that our roads capital program needs some injection over the next few years in order to sustain it.
Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Crone.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Marshall. Could you just go over again, repeat your comments about the rationale that you had behind only taking half? Are you saying that the library is well resourced for the next 10 years, or just please, if you could just go over that again, just so I can fully understand the state of their finances. Thank you.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair. So we did a 10-year reserve analysis based on the 10-year capital plans that were submitted by the library. And based on our analysis, the reserve was able to fund those expenses that were projected by the library in that time. So that's why we chose to only take 50% of that and move it to another area that we felt needed it.
Yeah, sorry if I made just one more time. So it's your conclusion that even though the library's taken on a new major project, opening a new branch, a huge branch, that they're still going, even without the extra 100,000, excuse me, that they're going to be in good shape?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So this is the asset replacement reserve for that. So in terms of the Health and Active Living Plaza and the costs associated for it, it's already budgeted through our development charges. So the fit up and everything for the library component of the Health and Active Living Plaza would be funded through the development charges. So this reserve is for asset management, so replacing later on. So right now, their 10-year plan shows that the reserve would be sufficient to accommodate their expenditures over the 10-year period.
Councillor Roy-DiClemente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The library, well, we've heard today from the region that things change over the course of 10 years. And when you think something's going to cost a certain amount of money and then the ground shifts underneath your feet and things are going to cost a different amount of money. So those 10-year capital plans are our best guess. For me, there's a couple of issues. One is that our library is governed by a separate board, and when as a municipality, under the budgeting process, we assign funds for them to operate and run the library, that's library money in my head. And if it weren't for the fact that they had significant savings in salary gapping, in folks who were on leave and so on, this surplus wouldn't exist. And so the library is seeing a tremendous recovery. We saw in Mr. Karmazin's area that there has been tremendous increase in programs, registrations, and so on. The library is also seeing that, trending far beyond what we had been predicting. They are circulating 26 items an hour, 24/7. So that's online, that's physical items. That is double-digit growth year over year, well beyond that of what was happening during COVID. So from my perspective, I would like to see money that we allocated in 2023 to be library money to stay as library money. I understand completely wanting to reallocate funds within the town's funding envelope. So if park structures didn't need it and roads does, that's great. But we have another governing body that has tasked Councillor Carruthers and I with saying we would like library money to stay library money. Thank you.
Councillor Foster, opportunity. Mayor Haxon, opportunity. I'll just say a couple things. Like I'm chairing finance, and for me, Councillor Roy-DiClemente calling out the various departments like that, that's how I see it in my head too. Like I'm not looking to champion one over the other. I see this as, like quite frankly, it's almost, the surplus is almost the tax increase that was levied on our residents that we challenged each other with so hard on in this last year. So I think that, you know, given the time and whatnot, for us to have a debate over this, it is challenging. But I would say the fact is that I'm actually against the 100,000 in there, but I'm actually not for the 200,000. I'm actually for it being zero. And I think it should go to roads. As Councillor Lahey's comment saying that we wouldn't have roads to drive to the libraries, it evokes a dramatic look. But if you actually look at the bank accounts, if how it was allocated in the GL on the expense ledger, or even how you want to allocate it and however we do that, the fact is that we literally wouldn't have the money in the bank account to pay for the roads. We have to borrow from the other bank account where we do have money, because our roads bank account doesn't have the money in it. And so if that is being the case, and we know that this money we're talking about asset management for repair and replacement, that means this discussion that is taking place right now, if we leave it in the library, we put it to roads, that means this discussion will come up again during budget when we say we need more sustainability for roads in a tax levy. So now what we're actually talking about is if we move that 200,000 to the library, we're actually talking about a 0.75% tax levy to residents. So that's what we're discussing. In my opinion, when you're looking at it from a finance standpoint, because the surpluses of the 2.1 million were sitting there. So I'm not in favor of this, but I will vote for the motion because I feel like 100,000 is very much a nod to the library because of the Councillor Roy-DiClemente said that money didn't come through lack of hard work and stress and commitment in order to get there. And I think that we should be advocating and championing for the libraries. But I'm actually not in favor of 200. I'm not in favor of 100. I'm in favor of moving it to roads. However, I will vote in favor of the 100 as a compromise. So, but don't know if anybody's got any other questions, comments, because I know I've been around the table once. Seeing none, was there an amending motion? I'll give the opportunity for that. Councillor Roy-DiClemente.
I actually did want to talk about the water budget as well, if we can. I don't see it necessarily in the resolution, or is it in Appendix A. When I went back, we've been seeing significant surpluses in our water budget year over year, and in fact, according to my adventure math, it's $12.1 million surplus over 5 years that we've been having. I calculated that using the 2.3 this year, 1.1 in 2022, 1.4 in 2021, 4.1 in 2020, and 3.2 in 2019. And I'm concerned because our ratepayers are, as Councillor Johns and I know that Ward 3 is starting to see some resolution from York Region, but our residents are paying a pretty hefty premium for some challenging water conditions, and yet we're still clocking in some surpluses. And I'm a little bit concerned that I understand that there's some fluctuation and we can't predict additional revenue when people are pulling up the water truck and filling their pools and so on. But this seems to be a trend, and I'd like to see some discussion around that trend.
Mr. Marshall?
So through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, so there's a couple of things that I'd like to comment on. So one, we've noticed that as well. And in the 2024 budget, we adjusted our volumes to try to capture that because we had been somewhat conservative in our estimates. We've noticed that it's been coming over, so we've adjusted it up. So hopefully we will not see that significant surplus again. So that's one. And the other thing is the financial plan that was done back in 2020, which is due for an update next year, said that we should be contributing $4 million a year towards our reserves to make sure that our asset management program was safe. With the surpluses on top of what we're contributing, we're still not quite at the $4 million. So we're still a bit less than what the plan has said that we should be contributing, but we're hopefully we're adjusting that as well.
We're on the water topic. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Mr. Marshall, do you want to continue?
Sure. Just have two quick slides
Yeah.
left, and there's we've discussed one already. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is the proposed allocation of reserve surplus to the fee-supported program. So it's either a surplus, so it's a contribution to the reserve, or we need to draw from the reserve. So this shows the $281,000 draw that is required for the fee-supported program. And I can skip to the next slide, and we can have questions on both of them if we need. So this slide shows where the surplus for the water and sewer program is going to, and shows the balances for the year. So happy to answer any questions on those two.
Any questions from committee? Thanks, Mr. Marshall. So we've had some discussion on both operating and water. Councillor Roy-DiClemente had moved the motion. I will linger to see if anybody else has any discussion points that they would like to bring before Councillor Lahey.
Thank you very much. This is, unfortunately, I think, getting a little bit unclear in terms of how the process is unfolding. In front of us, we have a resolution that's been put forward and prepared by Finance that we accept in principle the allocation of the year-end operating surplus as outlined in Appendix A. And I respect the professional opinion and expertise of our treasurer. He has guided us to this point where we are in a fortunate position of having a surplus. You have clearly articulated your rationale and the factors that went into your recommendations. And so I would strongly urge Council to accept the resolution as it is worded and presented to us here. Thank you.
Great. So Councillor Roy-DiClemente had moved the motion. Any other discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Oh, Councillor Roy-DiClemente. The theatrics. Yeah, you're opposed. Councillor Roy-DiClemente moved it and opposed.
I've opposed it.
Understood.
I put it on the table.
You moved it? Yeah, understood. My apologies. Okay, next item. Thank you, Mr. Marshall. The next item is a finance report for 2024-03 on the area-specific development charge studies. So had lots of discussion. Mr. Marshall, I can throw it back to you if someone likes to move so we can table that for discussion.
Happy to move it, and I think we have had a presentation on it, so I'm good to go.
Does that mean you are calling the vote? Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I do have a question. Bill 185, which was, I think, happened since your presentation. Are there any other impacts that you're anticipating other than what's in your report?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the wild card is the affordable housing exemption. So they came out with, so it looks like they've confirmed the definition of what affordable is, but they still haven't confirmed what figures they're going to be using for it. So depending on what comes out, that is kind of the wild card. But other than that, it's pretty good news for us.
Okay. From a planning perspective, is there anything, through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps Ms. Bégin could answer if there's any other impacts?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, there are a number of significant potential planning impacts if the bill receives royal assent, and staff will be coming forward with a memo with sort of a comprehensive overview. But I did want to note one that that relates to a matter that it was already before committee relating to the CHIA process, and this Bill 185 proposes to revoke the CHIA process and roll aspects of it back into the ministerial zoning order process. So you will see a report on the CHIA that goes into a little bit more detail, and then following that, a more fulsome memo on the impacts of Bill 185.
Thank you for that. I guess for us, the headline is we're doing our part for the housing crisis by putting our DCs lower.
Any other discussion on this item? Lots of discussion previously had. Councillor Carruthers moved it. All those in favor? Motion carries. Wonderful. We'll keep moving here. It's 5:06, and I'm happy to turn it over to our chair, Madam Mayor, for the next items on the agenda.
Thank you very much. That would be item L, I believe. Councillor Foster's in the chair.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I think you've left the closing act to Chief Broussard and I today, and quite frankly, I wish we had gotten here about an hour ago, but we didn't make it yet, so. Anyways, the item on the agenda today is a memo regarding emergency planning and a little bit of an update. Can I have a mover? Mr. Crone. And I will go to Chief Broussard for comments on the memo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am cognizant of the hour and the fact that we've been sitting for quite a while, and I know that certain parts of my anatomy can only take so much, so I'll be brief if I can. A bit of an opportunistic memo in front of you in that it follows not that long after the solar eclipse that many communities dealt with not that long ago, and in advance of Emergency Planning Week. It's coming up typically the first week of May, and so staff felt it appropriate to bring a brief memo to your attention regarding the ongoing work that we're doing from an emergency planning perspective, which is an extremely important part of what we do, though you may not realize it from day to day. Preparing for emergencies of a grand scale or something that ought to be looked at with a fair amount of detail. I happened to be in Barrie a couple of years ago when they were hit by a tornado. And these emergencies don't give any warning whatsoever. And so it's prudent to be prepared. And I want to assure you that emergency planning is a part of what we do daily, and indeed EG is well prepared. I won't go into a lot of detail. I think the memo sets out things fairly straightforwardly. I will point your attention to page 4, which lists a number of items that we've undertaken very recently this year to make sure that we are at the forefront and we are doing our due diligence there. I'll just highlight a couple of them very quickly. I'll share that your emergency plan that you have in place is a very robust plan. It's very contemporary in all respects. It does need a little bit of housekeeping, which we will attend to in the next couple of months with the advent of the new fire chief coming on board. We've been in compliance with the Emergency Management Ontario regulations, I think, every year since they were implemented, and we have been advised that our 2023 efforts are indeed in compliance. We've been advised of that by email. We're waiting the final letter from the EMO to validate that completely, but by all accounts, we are on track. The Emergency Management Program Committee meets regularly. We are indeed scheduled to meet next week. All the proper required appointments for personnel filling positions are in place. We meet regularly with our York Region counterparts who are great team members to work with. We have, for the first time, established a formalized work plan for the team this year, and we're adhering to it. We've also, for the first time, formalized the public education plan. And if you're a follower of Twitter, you will have seen an uptick in the number of emergency planning tweets that go out to our community, and I think they're fairly well received. We are testing our processes as we go through. Indeed, the build-up to the solar eclipse was an opportunity to test our Emergency Operations Center. We did so connecting with the Provincial Emergency Operations Center. Everything went flawlessly there. We tested our call-out procedure for staff. It worked very, very well. We engaged with the local emergency amateur radio people, and had a couple of learning points with them and are moving towards making sure that we're fully integrated with their operations. And lastly, I wanted to point out that you will have received recently a copy of the 2023 annual report regarding the provincial emergency management strategy and action plan. And the only part that I wanted to focus on there was a grant opportunity that's come along. EG did make an application for the grant this year. We were not successful this time. We will be successful next time. I'm very optimistic about that. And so I won't get into any more detail. I think the memo is fairly complete, but I'm at council's mercy if you have any questions.
Thanks, Chief Broussard. This is certainly not lost on me, as I was involved for quite a while. So not only you had the fire chief thrown at you, but the CEMC too. It's, yeah, big catchers met. Are there any questions from members of committee? Councillor Lahey.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. So with regard to a conversation that we were having earlier and governance questions and acting mayor questions, because the role of acting mayor is a very serious one, and for the benefit of all of us who are on that rotating schedule, in the event of an emergency, how clearly defined are the roles and responsibilities of an acting mayor during an emergency? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. The role of the head of council, whoever they may be at the given time, is primarily one of determining that an emergency does exist and formally declaring that. And there is a process that we would undertake to do that. The mayor has to sign a document that in turn is forwarded to the Provincial Emergency Operations Center and notifying provincial agencies and so on of the actual emergency. Beyond that, the Emergency Operations Center is staffed by primarily senior staff members who make up the Emergency Control Group. And of course, Mr. Valchik, as the lead person in that environment, would be charged with keeping the mayor and council fully informed, the mayor primarily, and through the mayor, the rest of council, of goings on in the community, so that council can be aware of any emerging issues. So,
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you.
Anything else from members of committee? So this was moved by Councillor Crone. Can we take a vote to receive the memo? All in favor? And that is carried. Is there anything else, Chief, at this time?
no, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I can turn it back to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Just get this sorted out here. Okay. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. We don't have any items under corporate services, but General Manager Gandhi wanted to introduce someone. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very pleased to introduce to members of council Bethany Lee. She's sitting in the desk right over there. Bethany is coming in as the Director of Communications and Customer Service, and we're really quite excited that she's joining the town while Laura Hanna is on leave, and Laura's leave begins Thursday, actually. Bethany comes to us with a broad range of experience, which I'm sure we'll all benefit from, including work with the GTAA. She had a similar role in Caledon and most recently from Peel Region. So her experience is vast, and we're very excited to have her on board. And if any members of council have any questions for her, she's right here to say hello.
Thank you and welcome. I don't think there's any questions. Madam Mayor, back to you.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm just moving down the agenda. Administration of the chair, there are no items. Other business, I've not been waved at for any other business that might have taken place, and an adjournment. Be it resolved that the meeting of the Committee of the Whole adjourn at 5:16 p.m. moved by Councillor Crothers. All those in favor? And that's carried. Just before we finish, I'd like to thank staff for the amount of work that you've put into a day like today. Each and every one of you, I'm sure, has been sitting at a desk, at the kitchen table, wherever you find some sense. And it's been a long day for us, but it's been a longer day for you as you presented to each one of us on where we're at, where we're going, and what great shape East Gwillimbury is in. So thank you very, very much. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.